Chapter 182. The driver was Red Scorpion himself. Changing the location of the transaction caused his originally gloomy eyes to reveal a frightening savagery. Without sparing the two students another glance, he stepped on the accelerator and headed straight for King's Cross Street. A pickup truck was even faster than him. With a rumble, it overtook him, then with a beautiful drift, it cut in front of him. It seemed like it was intentional, but also unintentional. It blocked Red Scorpion's fast-moving car. G. King, it's your turn. On the pickup truck, Xia Jinyuan had a faint smile in the corner of his eyes. It was as if he was leisurely playing a car race, and he informed Zhang Tu, who was moving with him, to overtake him. With a rumble, another pickup truck overtook Red Scorpion's car, then drifted directly in front of Xia Jinyuan. The expressionless Red Scorpion glanced at the pickup truck that kept overtaking and drifting in front of him. He stepped on the accelerator and turned into the outermost lane, turning into another road that led to King Cross Street. When Xia Jinyuan saw that he had successfully forced the other party onto a road that was not a shortcut, the faint smile between his brows gradually disappeared. His cold, dark eyes looked ahead with a sharpness as sharp as a sword, and he headed towards Yi Qian's location. The various men and women in the KTV were still dancing wildly and drinking in large mouthfuls. No one cared about the transaction in the dark, and even if they did, they wouldn't pay much attention to it. This was because this place itself was a drug-dealing place. At 9:40, Xia Jinyuan's low voice broke the silence in the earpiece. Yi Qian, who was resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. Hearing his restrained voice, he said with a faint smile, "Are you scared? Or do you find it very exciting?" Captain Xia knows me well. His voice seemed to come from ancient times, bringing with it the power to make people feel at ease. In an instant, it made her tense heartstrings relax. "Everything is fine. They're locked in a room on the 4th floor of a bar. I think they'll be safe until 12 o'clock. After 12, I'm not too sure." Gao Yang, who was also resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes when Yi Qian suddenly spoke. He thought Yi Qian was talking in his sleep. Before she could say another word, Gao Yang stood up abruptly and looked at Yi Qian in disbelief. "Captain Xia? Who? Who is she contacting? How is he going to contact the people outside?" Countless questions that he couldn't figure out kept popping up in his mind. Looking at the faint and leisurely smile at the corner of her eyes and the unhurried conversation, Gao Yang, who got up so abruptly that he felt a little dizzy, almost thought that he was hallucinating. "They're all fine. They're students, after all. They were kidnapped halfway through their journey, so they're not that vigilant. You guys go first. I still have the ability to protect myself." It was only slightly more than an hour after she had located the location of the abduction, but he had already arrived. It could be seen that he did not waste even a minute. She knew that he would definitely come. She had never doubted it. When Xia Jinyuan heard her slightly immature but exceptionally calm voice, he knew that his little fox was safe and sound. His cold, handsome face revealed a faint and warm smile. "Okay, wait for my good news. We'll meet before 12. He was telling Yi Qian that he would not let her wait until the moment of danger. He would definitely meet up with her before the danger came. A man's promise didn't require a solemn vow. It was more reassuring when it came inadvertently. "If I could get out on my own, I wouldn't have troubled you to come." Yi Qian, whose smile had not faded, replied with curved eyes. Her bright crescent-shaped eyes were like those of a cunning fox, full of spirit. "This is a rare opportunity for actual combat. I want to participate in it myself." Chapter 183. What a bold little fox. She wasn't afraid at all. Xia Jinyuan, who was hiding in the dark and waiting for the net to be reaped, gave a low laugh. His elegant eyebrows were relaxed. Okay, be careful. Since she wanted to fight her way out, he would give her a chance to do so. He would clear the obstacles outside and ensure her safety before she came out. Gao Yang had already moved closer to Yi Jian's left side and slowly sat down. His gaze fell on her ear as he stared at it closely. "You can contact the outside world." It was a completely affirmative sentence. "Yes, I can." Yi Qian lifted her long black hair, revealing a small black earpiece. It's our military personnel. They're outside now. They'll come find us after they've dealt with the outside before midnight. Gao Yang trembled slightly and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his handsome eyes were filled with self-mockery. So, all we have to do now is wait, right? Then why did you say that if you could, you wanted to go out by yourself? He wanted to ask, but he couldn't. She could contact the outside, but during this hour of torment, she kept silent and didn't tell him. What did this mean? That she didn't trust him? Or was it that he wasn't even worth a single word from her? That kind of helplessness made Gao Yang feel deeply frustrated. Not only was there helplessness in his tone, but there was also a trace of anger. Yi Qian narrowed her eyes slightly and looked at him indifferently. She chuckled. I didn't tell you because if you didn't contact us, you would only feel more uneasy. I'm not hiding anything from you now. I've already told you that someone will come to save us. You just have to wait patiently. She paused, seeing that he was trying his best to hide his fluctuating emotions with indifference. Her cold smile deepened. If no one contacts me, this communication device is useless. What she meant was, rather than letting him have hope in the beginning, why not give up hope in the beginning? Because when hope was shattered, he would be the one hurt in the end. Gao Yang's expression froze. He suddenly lowered his gaze weakly, and his straight shoulders slumped lightly. He had nothing to say. What she considered was far beyond what he could have thought of at that time. She still knew how to take care of her own feelings at a time like this, when she was about to break down. Gao Yang lowered his head and smiled bitterly. Just as his father had said, his so-called intelligence and inviolable self-esteem were just a joke in the eyes of others. He didn't ask any more questions, and Yi Qian didn't say anything either. Whether or not he could understand was his business. He had already made it clear enough. Time passed bit by bit, and at 10:30, Red Scorpion appeared near the KTV. Beside him was a student who trembled as he walked. Pass through here. Remember, one hand for the goods and the other for the money. If you don't get the money, you don't have to come back. The boy's lips trembled slightly. He still wanted to say something, but when he saw the ferocious look on Red Scorpion's face, he hugged the black bag in his hand and walked step by step towards the end filled with evil. He couldn't turn back, and Red Scorpion, who had never personally come forward to trade, definitely wouldn't allow him to turn back. Here we are, Nick. Someone closed the open window and informed Nick, who was waiting for the goods in the KTV. He was the #1 target that the international police had to capture. Red Scorpion still had his student deliver the goods. Nick, who was smoking a cigar, took a deep breath. His rugged face revealed a ferocious look. He crossed his muscular arms over his chest, revealing the green beast head tattoo on the side of his arm. Tell him that my patience is limited. This meant that he wanted Red Scorpion to personally deliver the goods. Chapter 184. They were all venomous snakes, so they carefully exited their holes and revealed their fangs. The entire process was done in an extremely secretive manner, leaving no traces and no one would be able to catch them. But for Nick, after what the Vietnamese student did, he didn't want a third party to be involved in the transaction. Red Scorpion didn't want to leave any evidence, and he didn't want to lose the goods either. The heavy metal music continued. Some people came in and some left. Xia Jinyuan and Su Yu, who were proficient in Japanese, entered the colorful dance floor, which was filled with perfume and sweat. Red Scorpion's figure was right in front of them, and in front of him was his own student. Underage children entering the adult world didn't seem to attract much attention. Outside, the international police were dispatched. Less than 2 minutes after Red Scorpion went in, Xia Jinyuan appeared in the kitchen of the bar. He was like a cheetah that had walked out of the grassland. He silently knocked down a large pastry chef wearing a long white chef's hat. When he came out again, he was also wearing a white chef's outfit, a white apron around his waist, and a long white hat. He lightly patted the chef who was fiddling with a plate of desserts on the shoulder. Hey, is this done? Okay. The pastry chef who was about to turn around suddenly felt a heavy blow on the back of his neck. Another pastry chef was knocked unconscious and finished off the job. A fire alarm suddenly rang, and thick smoke rose from the kitchen. Several pastry chefs in the bar all fainted on the ground, waiting for the international police to drag them away. Elimination complete. In the kitchen, Xia Jinyuan took off his white chef's outfit, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it directly into a pot of boiling water. His hat was also thrown into the pot. Disinfecting and erasing evidence, it was a very good method. 2 smoke grenades were thrown out, and the smoke alarm in the entire kitchen suddenly rang. Then, the fire alarm in the entire KTV rang loudly. The ear-piercing alarm wasn't covered by the heavy metal. A towel soaked in alcohol was ignited and thrown in the passageway leading to the kitchen door. The dancing men and women heard the fire alarm and smelled the burning smell. At the same time, screams rang out and chaos broke out in the crowd. The international police officers who blended into the crowd took control of the situation. They acted like experienced guests who were trying to escape, guiding the screaming crowd away. The bodyguards working in the bar immediately rushed to the kitchen where the alarm sounded. Xia Jinyuan and Su Yu, who had been waiting for a long time, swiftly acted as the vanguard. Before the bodyguards could take out their guns, they had already taken care of them. Upstairs, Nick received a call from his bodyguard. "Fire? Are you sure?" Red Scorpion, who was about to hand over the goods, moved quickly. He immediately took back the bag and rushed out the door with almost no hesitation. This was an extremely vigilant, venomous snake. Even the slightest movement would make him shrink back into his cave. Outside, the sirens sounded like an unfamiliar intruder, breaking the extravagance of King's Cross Street and announcing their arrival, warning the criminals that they had been surrounded. When the Chinese soldiers outside heard the sirens that came out of nowhere, their expressions changed as they contacted Xia Jinyuan. "Q King, the international police are acting without permission. The sirens have been sounded. You must be careful." The Chinese side sent out a total of 5 soldiers to carry out the mission. 2 of them were outside, keeping an eye on Red Scorpion. Xia Jinyuan and Su Yu were in the hotel, and Yi Qian was among the students. It could be said that they cooperated quite well, but they ran into a group of self-righteous international police officers. Chapter 185. Xia Jinyuan froze when he heard the news from his comrade waiting outside. Switched to the public channel. According to the plan, they needed to wait until they found Yi Qian and Gao Yiyang before the international police could show up. Now that these guys had stirred up trouble, even the usually well-mannered Xia Jinyuan wanted to beat them up. Xia Jinyuan switched to the public channel and immediately contacted Yi Qian. Chaotic sounds came from the headset. Yi Jian, who had also heard the sirens outside, no longer sat on the ground to rest. Instead, he stood up immediately. "Roger that. Don't worry about me. I found a pistol. I can protect myself." "Found a pistol?" Xia Jinyuan crouched on the stairs on the 2nd floor and stood guard. Su Yu was standing on a high stool he had gotten from somewhere. He was fumbling with a fire alarm light. After 2 minutes, he gave Xia Jinyuan an OK sign. Xia Jinyuan nodded slightly and gestured for them to move forward. When he heard her words, a smile flashed across his eyes. "Good job, little girl. We are now on the 2nd floor. The international police have surrounded the ground floor. You can leave through the escape window." Hearing his cold voice, Yi Qian turned off the lights in the room. He walked past Gao Yang, who had woken up, and stood in front of the window. Bang! With a cold gaze, Yi Qian fired a shot at the glass. The tempered glass shattered under the force of the bullet. Then, spiderweb-like cracks spread all over the glass. Yi Qian lifted his leg and kicked the glass lightly. When a footprint appeared on the spiderweb-like glass, Yi Qian turned to Gao Yiyang and said, "Take off your shirt and give it to me. Quick!" He couldn't be sure if there was anyone down there, so he could only use his bare hands to dig the glass into the room. Ever since Yi Qian fired the shot, Gao Yiyang's expression was one of shock and astonishment. Yi Qian said sternly. He had no choice but to obey. After he took off his short-sleeved uniform, he saw her wrap her hand with the uniform. She put a finger through the bullet hole and hooked it into the room. With a few clattering sounds, Yi Qian's gentle hooking force shattered the entire piece of glass in the room, leaving only a frame that only one person could pass through. Outside, there was no anti-theft net installed like in China. The flashing police lights illuminated the room. Yi Qian shouted at the motionless Gao Yang, "Quick, jump out of the window!" Gao Yang, who had been stunned by the gunshot, heard her shout and quickly rushed over. "Okay, follow me closely. Put on your clothes." Yi Qian didn't say much. He just threw the clothes back. "Move quickly. Don't panic. There are international police officers outside." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps came from outside, followed by 2 gunshots. The shots hit the door lock and made it fall off. Seeing that something was wrong, Yi Jian quickly loaded her pistol and pulled Gao Yang behind the door. The room was dark. When the enemy kicked the door open, a figure rushed in with a murderous aura. He rushed to the window that only had a frame left. After taking a quick look, he cursed, F***CKU. He turned his head and shouted at his partner, standing at the door, D****. They escaped. He cursed and rushed out again. The man standing at the door quietly raised his hand and pointed behind the door. After counting from 1 to 3, he suddenly turned the light switch back on. The dark room was lit up again. Chapter 186. The man who hadn't left the room pulled the door open and saw the 2 students he thought had escaped standing against the wall. With a furious expression, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Qian without hesitation. F***CK. You. Gao Yang saw this and didn't have time to be afraid of the gun in the man's hand. He instinctively raised his hand to block the slap aimed at Yi Qian's face. Bang! A familiar gunshot suddenly rang out. The man who had raised his hand to hit Yi Qian suddenly froze and fell to the ground with a loud thud. Only 30 seconds had passed. When a man at the door heard this, his expression changed. He quickly dodged outside and fired randomly into the room. Gao Yang was so shocked that he felt like his soul had left his body. He heard the gunshot and saw someone fall to the ground. Large amounts of blood began to flow out of his chest. The Western man who had wanted to kill Yi Qian a moment ago had become a bloody man. His fingers were still trembling and his eyes hadn't even closed. Blood flowed out of his mouth and flowed down his neck, wetting the man's thick beard. Multiple bullets were fired into the room. Gao Yang's eyes were wide open as he forcefully pulled his gaze away from the bloody man and forced himself to look at the bullet hole on the floor. His hands were tightly clenched into fists. He used so much strength that he couldn't stop his body from trembling. Yi Qian didn't have time to pay attention to his expression. There were only 15 bullets in the gun. Her gaze fell on the dead man's hand. He still had a gun in his hand. She needed this gun. After the random gunshot stopped, Yi Qian turned her head to look at Gao Yang, who was so shocked that his pupils were dilated. "I'm going to shoot outside now. Pick up the gun and give it to me." Gao Yang didn't know how many more times he was going to be scared tonight. He slowly shifted his gaze and looked at Yi Qian. Just now, he saw with his own eyes Yi Qian shoot one of the kidnappers without even blinking. She was so calm and practiced. It was as if she had done this countless times before. Her movements were swift and fierce, and her eyes were ice cold. Her entire body was emitting an aura that made his heart tremble. Even if she ordered him to pick up the gun, he couldn't refuse. "Okay." She nodded lightly and answered dryly. She trusted Yi Qian quite a bit. Yi Qian calculated the trajectory of the bullets in his mind, then looked at the closed door and said, "You've learned Taekwondo before. Show some dexterity. When I count to 3, roll over and pick up the gun." "All right." Gao Yang swallowed his saliva. His cold expression had already cracked. Under Yi Jian's cold and sharp gaze, he nodded solemnly. "Okay." Shooting, killing. Yi Qian didn't give Gao Yang a chance to accept it. At a time like this, every second was the key. After counting from 1 to 3, she lifted her leg and kicked the door open again. At the same time, she dodged to the side of the door and fired 3 shots outside. The bullets pierced through the door and into the kidnapper's left shoulder. A scream came from outside. Gao Yang was so nervous that his palms were covered in cold sweat. He picked up the gun and rolled over to Yi Qian's side. Gunshots came from outside the room again. Chaotic footsteps passed through the bullet-holed wooden door and clearly reached Yi Qian's ears. Chapter 187. At the same time, Xia Jinyuan's voice could be heard from the earpiece. Yi Qian, calm yourself down. Don't panic. You're still the same as how you usually shoot. Okay, I still have someone ambushing me outside. Let's get my classmate to leave first. Yi Qian took the gun from him and replied calmly. I can't leave for now. I have to cover the rear. He removed the magazine and took a look. Not bad, there were 13 bullets in it. He looked at Gao Yang, whose neck was dripping with sweat. Without waiting for Xia Jinyuan's reply, he pursed his lips and said to Gao Yang, Get down from the windowsill. I'll cover the rear. No. Gao Yang refused directly. I can't be at ease if I leave you here. Yi Qian raised his eyebrows and said in amusement, Did you see me scared when I was killing people just now? Also, when I counterattacked, you should have heard someone screaming outside when you picked up the gun. The bullet I shot hit his left shoulder. After careful calculation, I shot to make sure there was no mistake. So, Gao Yang, you have to leave. I can't take care of you anymore. Xia Jinyuan and the others were still in the bar. She could roughly tell from the public channel that the international police did not care about the lives of the Chinese soldiers and directly took action. There was no movement outside, but they couldn't stay put and not leave. Under Yi Qian's urging, the pale-faced Gao Yang retreated step by step to the window. He heard Yi Qian's cold voice and shouted again, Leave now. Gao Yang supported himself with both hands on the windowsill. His actions seemed to be instinctive as he propped himself up and left the room. Even when the glass pierced his palms and the sharp pain stimulated his nerves, he did not wake up from his daze. From holding the hose down to sliding to the ground, to being rescued by the police in the car, it was as if his entire being had been emptied. Upstairs, Yi Qian held 2 pistols and forcefully pulled open the door. After shooting randomly, she saw the bullet holes on the ground increase. After seeing the bullet specifications, Yi Qian gently curved the corners of her mouth. The USM-9 pistol produced by the Meberetta Company had 9 by 19 millimeters ammunition and 15 plus 1 rounds loaded. Now that the bullet holes on the ground increased to 12 rounds, there was a short pause. This is the moment. While the other party was reloading, Yi Jian rolled on the ground a few times. Lying on her back on the floor of the corridor, she fired her gun at an extremely fast speed. She fired 2 shots consecutively with both hands, destroying the lights in the corridor. Following the trajectory of the bullets, Yi Jian calmly fired a shot in the direction where the bullets came from. There was a muffled sound, followed by a plop sound. Someone had already fallen to the ground. She was on the 4th floor, while Xia Jinyuan was on the 2nd floor. Yi Qian did not know how many targets there were on the 4th floor. After taking care of 2 burly men with guns, Yi Qian spoke to Xia Jinyuan. 2 targets eliminated on the 4th floor. The exact number of targets is unknown. On the 2nd floor, Xia Jinyuan heard the gunshots through his earpiece and knew that she had taken action. It would be a lie to say that he was not worried. The target is on the 6th floor. Girl, you must remember to hide on the ceiling above the corridor. I'll come and find you. No matter how worried Xia Jinyuan was, he did not show it in his words. He also did not tell Yi Qian that he and Suyu were the only ones who entered the KTV. He also did not tell Yi Qian that their combat style was actually assassination and shooting. Chapter 188. Suyu was in charge of shooting and clearing while Xia Jinyuan was in charge of the assassination. The 2 of them cooperated seamlessly and went straight up to the 4th floor to rescue Yi Qian. But now that she was out, her comrades outside could hide on the 6th floor. Soon, Yi Qian heard Xia Jinyuan say in a low voice in the public channel, G3, Operation Coiling Snake, the 3rd step of Operation Stone Crushing. Coiling Snake. The snake, here naturally referred to red scorpion. Coiling was equivalent to killing. The Vietnamese military didn't need to care if Red Scorpion was dead or alive, as long as he was captured in the end. News from the Vietnamese. 1 student was successfully rescued from the car, and the other student is still in the hands of Red Scorpion. G3's voice was different from Xia Jinyuan's low voice, but it also contained a hint of elegance. His voice was a bit hoarse, like the edge of a knife scraping against a whetstone. Just hearing it made one feel that this person was not to be underestimated. Hearing this unfamiliar voice for the first time, Yi Qian, who had already turned around to hide on the ceiling, held his breath. She was holding a gun like this. It was actually illegal. She didn't know if it would affect Xia Jinyuan. Another person spoke, and it was also an unfamiliar voice. Looks like we have to meddle in other people's business again. J5 received, Operation Coiling Snake commencing. G3, J5, Q King. Why was Xia Jinyuan the only one with Q King, which meant King of Elites? Is the little girl still there? If she is, say something to me. J5 style was a little different. It was less cold and hard, but more casual and bad. If you're still on the 4th floor, find a place to hide. You must remember your brother Xia's words. Hide well on the ceiling. Your brother Xia will come looking for you soon. Be good. Although it's cool to hold a gun, bullets will hurt a lot when they hit your body. J5 was an instructor. One day, he insisted on switching positions with the company commander. From then on, he no longer forced the soldiers to do ideological and political work. He was even more obsessed with the glory of the battlefield than the company commander. In his own words, it would be very cool for a man to run a lap on the battlefield. Super cool. Countless female soldiers bowed to him. When Xia Jinyuan heard that J5, who usually liked to tease female soldiers, was teasing the little fox that he had his eyes on, his dark eyes darkened. He said with a faint smile, J5, I heard that you got a 1 last week. I'd like to go back and spar with you. Please enlighten me. Student Yi Qian, please be careful. Believe in the People's Liberation Army and believe in Captain Xia. They will definitely save you. Also, look for me if you don't have enough bullets. Over. The J5 style changed again. It was full of coldness, and the sharpness of a soldier was fully displayed in its words. As the subject of their conversation, Yi Qian felt that there was no need for her to remain silent any longer. She hid her emotions well and smiled faintly. Thank you for your concern. They say that it's better to rely on yourself than on others. I've always liked to help myself. You have backbone. Not bad. G3 laughed. In the darkness, his and J5's hidden figures were like fierce beasts on the hunt. He threw out a climbing rope and hooked it onto a building. He gestured to J5. He grabbed the rope with both hands and agilely climbed up to the 7th floor in an instant. After confirming that the surroundings were safe, he replied to J5, who was covering the rear downstairs, with a strange sound that sounded like a rock falling on plastic. J5 put the submachine gun behind his back and nimbly climbed up to the 7th floor. Done, brothers. Wait for our good news. J5 was a soldier who was relaxed at all times. He had a small personality that was different from ordinary soldiers. After he finished speaking, he didn't forget to say to Yi Qian, Student Yi, G3 rarely praises people. Q King was the first to be praised by him. You're the second. Not bad, good luck. Chapter 189. For some reason, Yi Qian suddenly thought of the laughing J5 as the young people who liked to act cute on social networks in his previous life. Thinking about it, he shivered and couldn't bear to look at it directly. Xia Jinyuan had already quietly flanked the back of a gun-wielding bodyguard. While his left hand covered the bodyguard's mouth, the military dagger in his right hand silently cut across the bodyguard's neck. The sharp blade cut through the warm skin, cutting through the bodyguard's trachea and jugular vein without a trace of obstruction. Blood flowed onto the dagger, and the warm blood sprayed onto his wrist. The thick and strong smell of blood didn't stop Xia Jinyuan's footsteps. He dragged the dead bodyguard to a room on the 2nd floor, closed the door, and headed to the 3rd floor. Killing people was a very terrifying thing, but for them, they were on the front lines. It was either you die or I die. As they fought for justice, even if their hands were stained with blood, there was no turning back. Mercy wasn't used on the enemy. Clear. Walking to the 3rd floor, Xia Jinyuan, who had cleared out 2 hidden guards, lightly tapped the microphone. Su Yu, who had brought up the rear, climbed up the stairs and switched to him as the vanguard to continue clearing out the targets. After taking care of another drug gang member, Xia Jinyuan directly took off the bulletproof vest he was wearing and gave it to Little Fox. The elevator to the 6th floor had already stopped moving. Nick, who had gotten up, tugged at his t-shirt. Looking at Red Scorpion, who had rushed out of the door and was now closing in on him amidst the shrill sirens, he smiled fearlessly. "Buddy, if you rush out now, I can guarantee that you won't leave here alive." His brown eyes coldly swept over the black bag in Red Scorpion's hand. "Give me the goods, I'll give you the money, and we'll leave together. How about it? Why should I believe you?" Red Scorpion's face didn't show much panic. He glanced at the students standing at the door, already frightened to tears by the sirens, and coldly snorted. "You said that the transaction was 100% safe. What about now? We're already surrounded. Why should I believe you?" Red Scorpion was about the same as the majority of Vietnamese. He had a medium build, and his forelimbs were thick and short. However, his explosive power was extremely strong. His 2 arms looked short and small, but the muscles hidden under his shirt were filled with power. He stared at the calm and composed Nick, and his purplish-black lips curled into a cruel smile. "I'm willing to bet that not only are there international police officers outside, but there are also people inside the KTV. Maybe someone has already sneaked into this building and is ready to take your life at any time." "Yes, buddy, you're right. Someone has already infiltrated this building." Nick shrugged his shoulders, maintaining the venomous smile on his face. "But I'm not afraid at all. Come, let me show you what I'm capable of." As he spoke, he clapped his hands, and the wardrobe door on the right wall suddenly opened. A Western man with brown hair and brown eyes, wearing black sweatpants and a tank top, walked out with his back bent. "Everything is ready. I'm waiting for your orders. Come, buddy." Nick took the lead and bent down, walking into the wardrobe. After that, Red Scorpion also walked in. Seeing the scenery in front of him, he laughed out loud. "Working with you is indeed very reassuring. I always thought, no, I think everyone, including those stupid international police, had been deceived by you, brother." This was a computer room, and at the same time, an armory. Chapter 190. As Nick raised his hand, the 24 surveillance screens that had been black all this time lit up in unison. What appeared on the screens was nothing else but the situation of the entire building. They could clearly see the situation of the entire building, including the KTV and the kitchen. Hidden at the end of the corridor on the 4th floor, Yi Qian, who was on the ceiling, suddenly felt like he was being watched. His hair stood on end. He lowered his head and looked at the fire emergency light with a weak green light. He saw a small red light flashing. That was an infrared sensor and an infrared night camera. Yi Qian's heart suddenly sank. He suddenly understood why the killing of the 2 people and the shooting didn't attract the attention of other drug gangs. The people she killed were clearly the top target of the European investigation. They were pawns that could be abandoned at any time. They were even pawns that could be used at critical moments. "Girl, there's a bit of trouble outside. Hide on the ceiling and don't move around." Xia Jinyuan said to her calmly, "Hide well. Before I say you can move, you must hide well." "Okay, I know," Yi Qian said softly. He told the Chinese soldiers who were all watching the public channel what he had discovered. "If I'm not wrong, the entire building is filled with infrared cameras, infrared sensors." Xia Jinyuan was sitting on Su Yu's shoulder. He was biting a delicate but extremely sharp knife in his mouth. His slender hands, which were wearing half-finger combat gloves, were modifying an infrared sensor. After hearing her voice, Su Yu smiled and replied, "I'm dealing with it. Don't worry, it'll be done soon." This little girl's sensitivity was really amazing. He turned off his microphone and said to Xia Jinyuan, "You can even find out like this. You're really good." "Of course. Don't you know who wanted you?" Xia Jinyuan raised his eyebrows and smiled. Under the helmet, his handsome face was calm and gentle. "Hide well. I'm dealing with a small matter on the 3rd floor." This was Nick's base camp. When the international police still insisted that Melbourne was his base camp, the Chinese side tried to persuade them to no avail. "Fine, forget it if you don't believe me. Let's do our own thing." If he really listened to the international police, his steel-like body would have dozens of bullet holes. K7, can you say something?" I'm a bit tired from being hung up. I can feel the blood not only flowing to my head, but also to cough, cough, cough. J5's voice came again, but before he could finish, G3's fist landed on his chest. What he wanted to say turned into a low cough. He wanted to say that blood was flowing to a certain part of a man. There's another K7 with 26 English letters as its code name. Yi Jian didn't think too much about what J5 wanted to say. Instead, she focused on K7, who hadn't spoken a word. About a minute later, K7's voice came lazily. Hearing it, Yi Jian felt a chill run down her spine. Not only was it cold, but it also gave off a feeling of death. You live and they die. That was K7's original words. J5 rubbed his chest and jumped down. He rubbed his arms and said softly, "Every time I hear you talk, I feel like I'm a dead object on the dissection table, waiting for you to dissect me with a scalpel." Chapter 191. In front of them, several infrared sensors were still moving back and forth. J5 stuck close to the wall and completely ignored the sensors that could detect them. Since K7 had given the order, they were free to pass. Two black bodyguards were in front of them. After J5 and G3 made a hand gesture, they quickly approached the two black bodyguards. Their hands shot out at lightning speed, one on the left and one on the right, strangling the two bodyguards' necks. They exerted strength in their arms and lifted the bodyguards, who were at least 9 meters tall and had a strong physique, off the ground. Cracking sounds could be heard from their fragile necks. The black bodyguards struggled with their feet off the ground. Their hands were already clinging tightly to the two men's iron arms. In the end, their tongues were sticking out, and the whites of their eyes kept rolling up. In the end, their arms and legs were hanging limply. After finishing them off, they gently put them down, then dragged them up and hid them in a dark corner. It was an easy task to get from the 7th floor to the 6th floor. They used assassinations to clear the way. In the end, they stood at the fire escape door leading to the 6th floor. J5 and G3, who were wearing combat uniforms, were already sweating profusely. Under the dim emergency lights, they saw two pairs of black eyes with the same expression. They were calm, fearless, and fierce. The 7th and 3rd floors were cleared almost at the same time. There was still a 5th floor that needed to be cleared by Xia Jinyuan and Su Yu. On the 4th floor, Yi Qian, who had been lying motionless, saw the fire escape door gently open. Then, a slender and imposing figure appeared in his line of sight. The familiar figure made Yi Qian's eyes shine in the dark like a meteor streaking across the night sky, bringing dazzling brilliance. "Captain Xia, I'm here." Without needing him to speak, she had already recognized the figure. A clear voice came from the ceiling above. Xia Jinyuan's gaze stopped at a certain spot in the dark. He smiled and said, "Do you want to come down, or do you want to stay here?" She was happy. Even though they were in the dark, Xia Jinyuan could feel it. There was a rustling sound from the ceiling. After a buckle was removed, Yi Qian jumped down from the ceiling and landed lightly in a half squat. "Let's go together. It's not safe to stay here." She wasn't afraid of killing people, so she wasn't afraid to continue walking. "Then follow me." Xia Jinyuan chuckled and handed over a black bulletproof vest that didn't fit well. "Put on. It doesn't fit well, but it's still good for you." Yi Qian didn't refuse. She had seen this kind of bulletproof vest on the two kidnappers she had taken care of earlier. If it wasn't for the fact that it was stained with blood, she would have taken it off and put it on. Outside, the sirens were still blaring. Someone stood out and shouted through the loudspeaker, "You've been surrounded. You'd better surrender and come out." If he really wanted to surrender, he would have come out a long time ago. Yi Qian sneered. He stuck close to the cold figure in front of him and approached the 5th floor. On the 6th floor, Red Scorpion listened to the voice that he loathed and said through gritted teeth, "I think we can teach them a lesson right now." Damn voice, it's so unpleasant to the ear. He stared at the surveillance screen, where he could clearly see the streets near the building. "Did you hear that, my weapons expert? Our partner. I hope you can teach those rats outside a lesson." Nick enjoyed the feeling of making the international police feel helpless. Look at them, what a bunch of trash. He looked at the corner of the room. Only then did Red Scorpion realize that there was someone there. Judging from his back, he wasn't a Westerner. He probably had the physique of an Asian. His back didn't move. He only raised his hand and snapped his fingers as an answer to Nick. Chapter 192. All passers-by were prohibited from entering this area, and even the nearby residents were evacuated by the police. Only the small 7-story building was tightly surrounded, and there were even helicopters circling around on the top floor. The target was inside, and the international police were acting with the determination to capture all of them. Following Nick's loud laughter in the room, several loud boom sounds suddenly exploded from nearby. A police car was directly thrown into the air by the heat wave, and then smashed into another car with a bang. In less than a minute, countless explosions sounded in the surroundings. This is my territory. Even though I won't be coming back, I still have to say that I really like this exciting and depraved place. Nick smiled cruelly in the midst of the blazing flames. This is my territory. Even though I won't be coming back, I still have to say that I really like this exciting and depraved place. Red Scorpion sneered disapprovingly. If we take everyone as hostages, we'll leave even faster. No, I hate using hostages the most. Ha! I prefer to directly confront those self-righteous fellows. Nick was not like Red Scorpion, who liked to act alone. He invested a lot of manpower and resources to tease the international police who were no different from rats in his eyes. The international police, who were originally full of confidence, were instantly shaken by the 4 explosions around them, and all of their faces tightened. The commander began to roar loudly, and the sound of ambulances filled the entire sky of Sydney. The entire city's police force was mobilized, and all of the entrances to King's Cross Street were sealed off, entering a state of high alert. Damn it! Where are the explosives experts? Hurry and get them here. God, there's still a bomb here. Hurry! A police officer began to call for help with his walkie-talkie, but before he could finish, the bomb was manually detonated, causing the officer who was on the phone to directly lie under the car door. Among the rocks that rushed into the air, his voice was distorted. Manually detonated. Can't get close. The international police had loudspeakers, and so did Nick. His voice was transmitted through the speakers outside the KTV, and he laughed loudly. I hope you like my present, cute rats. If you have fun, I don't mind giving you my present again. His voice was cold and cruel like a demon's, causing the faces of the international police officers hiding under the cars, behind the trees, and behind the buildings to turn the color of pig liver. This was humiliation. They were being humiliated by a criminal. Yi Jian didn't know why, but when she heard that, she felt quite relieved. K7's cold and emotionless voice came through the earpiece. He mentioned Yi Qian's name directly. Hey, Yi Qian, you're small. Go through the ventilation duct and give them a few smoke grenades. Then, without waiting for Yi Qian to reply, she told him the location of the ventilation duct from the 4th floor to the 6th floor. He then said to Xia Jinyuan, "This is a good arrangement. Does Q King have any objections?" K7, you're talking too much. Focus on your work. Be careful. You might expose your identity. J5's voice was no longer as casual as before. Instead, he cut him off coldly. Also, you have no right to assign a student to complete the mission for us. She's still a student. No matter how capable she is, she's still a citizen that we need to protect. In the past, as a political instructor, once he discovered that his comrade's behavior was out of line, he had to immediately stand up and stop him. Chapter 193. Case 7, who was hiding somewhere, was silent for a while before he said, "Sorry." Then he didn't say anything else. After secretly taking care of the 4 people on the 5th floor, Xia Jinyuan raised his hand and shielded Yi Qian behind his arm. Under Su Yu's vigilant gaze, he said calmly, "The 5th floor has been cleared. I agree with K7's plan, but I'll go over. This place is too small." Yi Qian was already standing at the vent. Xia Jinyuan walked over to take a look, then squatted down and patted his shoulder. He said to Yi Qian, "Come, sit on my shoulder and use it to pry open the seal. Yi Qian looked at Su Yu, who was holding a gun, then looked at Xia Jinyuan, who was already squatting down in his combat uniform and helmet. He bit his lower lip and didn't hesitate anymore. He took the military knife from Su Yu's hand, took a deep breath, and sat on Xia Jinyuan's shoulder. After prying open the seal, Yi Qian narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, "You can go in. All three of you can go in." After saying that, she held the sides of the opening with both hands and leaped into the air like a fish entering the vent. K7 informed the international police. Let them do as they see fit. Grabbing Yi Qian's arm, Xia Jinyuan jumped up with one foot on the wall and climbed up the vent again. So you go. After K7 tampered with all the infrared rays, the three of them disappeared right under Nick's nose. After 5 consecutive explosions, red flames could be seen rushing over King's Cross Street in the sky above the city. Gao Yang, who was struggling violently in the ambulance, was forcibly injected with a tranquilizer by the medical staff. He was directly pushed into Sydney's best private hospital, a private hospital that the Gao family owned 25% of shares in. When Director Li, who was waiting in the hotel, heard about this, he clasped his hands together and prayed, "God bless." Now he just had to wait for Yi Qian, who was with the Chinese soldiers, to come back. Director Li was finally relieved to see him with his own people. Outside the KTV, Nick proposed a deal. It was very simple: leave safely. His request happened to be something that the international police could not agree to. They could only stall for time and quickly arrange for the team to enter the KTV. Smoke grenades were thrown in one after another, and the fire alarm continued to ring sharply without stopping. "Where are the soldiers from the Chinese side? Tell them to contact me immediately. Right away." The commander of the operation was a white man. At this time, he was so angry that he was like a mad lion. He roared, "Damn it, where did they go? Damn it, why let them get involved? God, let them go to hell." As the commander-in-chief of this operation, he had an undeniable responsibility for the 5 consecutive explosions. However, it was not over yet. The other party still had explosive points and extremely lethal weapons. Last time, who was the one who said that the damn Nick was active in King's Cross Street? His roars were transmitted from the walkie-talkie to the commander at the scene. Even through the line, he could feel his saliva flying everywhere. The commander at the scene was a European police officer. When he heard this, he puffed out his cheeks and sighed heavily. He said with a serious expression, "Yes, sir. The Chinese soldiers suggested it, but unfortunately, no one believed them. Including you, who chose not to believe them." All the international police officers who could hear the conversation were silent. They all remembered. Now we need to contact them because they were the first to enter. Oh, wait a moment. There's an emergency call. The commander at the scene took the walkie-talkie. Before he could speak, a cold and emotionless voice came from the other side. It was K7 who had contacted him. At this time, Xia Jinyuan, Yi Qian, and Su Yu had just entered the vent. Chapter 194. K7 was a soldier who didn't like to talk nonsense. No matter where he was, he always had a lifeless expression on his face. At this moment, the commanding officer only felt that K7 was extremely cute. "Okay, no problem. We will cooperate fully." "Okay, I will arrange for someone to send it over immediately." Okay, we understand. Now, let's start the operation immediately." The good news made the commanding officer's solemn expression disappear. After K7 ended the call, he handed the communicator to his officer. After the cross-section of the building was sent to the international police, the 30 vanguards directly cut into the 6th floor, while the 20 vanguards rushed in from the 7th floor. K7, who was still in contact with Xia Jinyuan, looked behind him and sent a message on his phone. "The sniping operation has begun." On the opposite side of the building, someone looked down at the message and whistled happily. He set up his sniper rifle and put his blue eyes close to the scope. The cross in the scope was aimed at a certain direction. As long as the main target appeared, he would immediately open fire. On the 6th floor, Yi Qian, who was lying on his stomach, could clearly see the number of people walking back and forth in the corridor through the ventilation blinds. He already knew the number of people, but now he had to wait for a very important item. He had to wait for the international police vanguards to send the gas masks over. Only with a mask could they throw down the smoke grenades and tear gas grenades. The elite vanguards moved very quickly. In addition, everything on the first floor had been cleared out. The two vanguards who were responsible for delivering the gas masks also carried a 30-round emitter submachine gun that was specially provided to the special forces. After Yi Qian received it, he suppressed his surprise and skillfully checked the gun. Under Xia Jinyuan's orders, he had already prepared 2 smoke grenades, 2 flash grenades, and 2 tear gas grenades. They were all thrown out at the same time. Q King, Broken Wing, G3, who had broken into the 6th floor, had a cold expression. They cooperated seamlessly and started the operation together. The international police vanguards broke into the door from the right and fired directly. G3 and J5 broke into the door from the left and fired directly. The entire 6th floor was plunged into an intense gunfight. In the room, Nick, who was still feeling pleased with himself, heard the gunshots outside. He looked at the surveillance screen that didn't show any abnormalities at all. His face instantly contorted. He slapped the face of the staff operating the surveillance system and roared, "Motherf Kerr, give me the rocket launcher." Red Scorpion's reaction was even faster. They snatched the drugs from Nick's hands in an instant and threw back the box containing US dollars that they had traded for. He firmly believed that the goods were the safest in his hands. Pulling his student over, he picked up a machine gun and started shooting at the escape window. "Damn it, what are you doing?" When Nick saw this, he immediately waved his hand to signal his bodyguards to stop Red Scorpion's foolish actions. "You want to run? Suit yourself. Don't drag me into this, you idiot. Blow them all up. Motherf Kerr, you're playing with me." As Nick roared furiously, 2 tear gas grenades and 2 smoke grenades appeared out of thin air in the bulletproof and explosion-proof room. In an instant, the entire room was shrouded in thick smoke. The tear gas made everyone unable to open their eyes. "Up there, Motherf Kerr. Shoot up there," someone shouted, but he choked on his tears, and his nose kept flowing, and he even coughed. The people in the room were like living targets as countless bullets rained down. The international drug cartel's higher-ups, led by Nick, were almost completely wiped out in this encirclement. Chapter 195. Red Scorpion, where do you think you're going? After everything was cleared, someone appeared and pointed his gun at a cabinet. His cold voice was as calm as a pool of stagnant water. "Come out, Red Scorpion." Behind the cabinet was Red Scorpion, who had one hand tightly covering his student's head. He didn't move, as if there was no one hiding behind him. The cold eyes of the person who spoke didn't waver in the slightest. He didn't give Red Scorpion a chance to think, and directly fired 2 shots at the cabinet. "My patience is limited, Red Scorpion. Don't test my patience." This was K7's voice. His face was thin, and his skin was sickly pale, as if it had never been exposed to sunlight. His eyes, which were staring at the metal cabinet, were black, sharp, and filled with cold, killing intent. There was movement behind the metal cabinet, and Red Scorpion walked out with his student. When he saw who was standing in front of him, his pupils contracted. "It's you." It was Nick's weapon expert. After seeing who it was, he pressed the gun against his student's head even harder. He stared coldly at K7. "Who are you? You won't live no matter how many hostages you have." K7 directly ignored his question. He pulled the trigger lightly, and his thin lips moved slightly. In his eyes, Red Scorpion was already a cold corpse. "Before you die, don't drag others down with you." It was standard American English. Surprisingly, K7 spoke much more elegantly when he spoke English than when he spoke Chinese. "Give me the student, and the rest is up to you." In return, Red Scorpion laughed contemptuously. He directly pressed his gun against the Vietnamese student's head, and the hole left a green crescent moon mark on the boy's temple. "Do you know who he is?" "The son of a big shot." "Ha ha, you could talk to him right now." See if he wants his son back alive or shipped back as a corpse. His words made K7 furrow his brows without leaving a trace. His thin but extremely delicate face became even colder. The hostage in Red Scorpion's hands is said to be the son of a big shot. They've hidden the identity of the Vietnamese student. F***K. I knew these bastards were unreliable. G3 sneered and said to K7, the hostage is in our hands. Stay calm and wait for us to arrive. K7's black eyes stared at Red Scorpion without blinking. His hands that held the gun were also aimed at the center of his target's forehead. No need. Clean up the weapons outside. Leave this place to me. This was the room where Nick had first made his deal with Red Scorpion. The tense atmosphere became increasingly tense under the boy's terrified gaze. Time ticked by, and after about 5 minutes, K7 heard the identity of the hostage. His brows were tightly knitted together. He seemed to be in a difficult position, but in fact his tense gaze had relaxed a lot. The vents of every room were connected. Yi Jian, who didn't jump down from the vents, moved her body gently under Xia Jinyuan's instructions and entered the central air conditioning vent that was so narrow that only girls could enter. Continue forward, Yi Qian. Don't look back. I'll wait for you in front. The low voice, one word at a time, slowly, and with a penetrating force, came through the earpiece. Yi Qian listened to Xia Jinyuan's voice, and her eyes were filled with determination. His voice was like light, able to pierce through the darkness, piercing through the shade. It carried a warm force, encouraging her. Chapter 196. With him behind her, as well as the soldiers that belonged to her own country, she felt so at ease. Now, all she had to do was pass through the air duct in front of her, and she would be able to enter the room where Red Scorpion held the hostage. Yi Qian only lightly tapped the side of the microphone rhythmically, telling them that she was fine and that they didn't need to worry. There was already sweat on her temples. Nervousness, excitement, and excitement. Under these three emotions, Yi Qian's delicate lips lightly pursed. Then, she lightly breathed in the slightly turbid air and continued forward. She's fine. K7, keep a close eye on her, Xia Jinyuan said to everyone, including K7, who was currently confronting Red Scorpion. She's inside. I'll hand her over to you. Hearing this, K7 indifferently blinked his eyes, as if he had agreed. Red Scorpion had been uneasy for a long time. His elbow was tightly wrapped around the Vietnamese student's neck, strangling him to the point that the student's breathing suddenly became difficult. He wanted to gasp for air, but because of the lack of oxygen, his face was flushed red like a stranded fish. He didn't even have the chance to struggle. After 2 minutes, the hostage in your hands will die from lack of oxygen. As for you, Red Scorpion, you still won't be able to escape. K7 was indifferent to this, as if the hostage in the enemy's hands was actually a puppet. In the narrow air duct, Yi Qian's back was already drenched in sweat as she crawled. Even though she was wearing a gas mask, she didn't stop. Using her shockingly flexible body to pass through a right angle, she paused for a moment to adjust her breathing. Then, she moved to the air duct where she could clearly see Red Scorpion's back. Outside, everyone was on high alert. The representative sent by the Vietnamese military was already so anxious that his forehead was covered in cold sweat as he prayed nonstop. The Vietnamese special forces that had already entered the building rushed in front of the international police, using their own bodies to prevent the international police from ignoring the only son of one of their country's military ministers in order to eliminate the drug kingpin. This was a battle of wits. For the Chinese military, they were fully prepared. Eliminating all of them in one fell swoop was definitely not a problem. Outside, the international police and the Vietnamese military watched through the thick smoke as they held their guns tightly and guarded the side of the engine room. In front of the hidden cabinet door that led to another room, a police officer stood up and said in a very troubled tone, "Right now, there's only one target left. We don't want to steal your credit, but we want to complete the mission perfectly. Chinese military, the only son of our country's minister. If anything happens, can you take responsibility?" The Vietnamese soldiers were extremely nervous. They were currently riding on a tiger's back, so they had to be extremely careful. The confrontation between the two sides, Xia Jinyuan's eyes, and their gazes became colder and colder. J5 laughed coldly. What's credit? Sorry, I don't understand. And you, all of you if you want to rush in, sure. Come, take a look at the situation inside the house. J5 walked to the only surveillance screen that hadn't been destroyed. His 10 fingers tapped on the keyboard for a while, and the originally still surveillance screen flickered a few times before it instantly cut into the next room. Use to us, he said to the two to the red to look. Of course, you'll have to deal with the consequences yourself. J5's smile was like a spring breeze, but the meaning behind his words was as cold as ice, suffocating the people around him. Xia Jinyuan had already put away his gun and said indifferently, I think, with the strength of the international police and the Vietnamese military, and with so many people charging in together, it shouldn't be impossible to save a hostage. G3, inform our people to retreat. Chapter 197. This was a good move, allowing them to clearly see the situation in the room across the surveillance screen. Xia Jinyuan calmly ordered the Chinese people to retreat in English. However, the first to panic were the Vietnamese soldiers. Wait, please wait. Afraid that the Chinese soldiers confronting Red Scorpion would retreat, the Vietnamese soldiers quickly apologized. Sorry, I apologize for our recklessness. When the international police also apologized and pleaded with Xia Jinyuan for help from the Chinese soldiers, Yi Qian, who was holding his breath, smiled. He had said before that he would make those who looked down on the Chinese side beg the Chinese soldiers to help them. Tonight, he really did it. That's right. Not only were his words worth 1,000 pieces of gold, every single one of them was true. How could a great country be looked down upon by others? The dignity of the country, the dignity of the people, how could they be looked down upon by other countries? Yi Qian put away the faint smile on his face, the cold black bullet hole aimed at Red Scorpion's back through the slender gap in the ventilation net. There was no wind, the temperature was normal, the visibility was high. The distance was close, one bullet hit the heart, and the other hit the back of the head. Now was the time. Shooting at close range didn't require any scopes to observe. It relied on aiming and strength. When Yi Qian, who maintained a high level of calmness, fired the first bullet, the second bullet was only 30 seconds away from the first bullet, and the second bullet hit the back of Red Scorpion's head. Blood, like a mist, exploded with a boom. Even though there was clearly some distance between them, Yi Qian felt as if the blood had filled her eyes, and the entire world was blood red. It was as if she didn't know anything, but also as if she couldn't see anything. Only the mist of blood and the exploded head and neck kept brushing past her eyes. Close-range shooting. 2 consecutive shots. No matter how tough his life was, he should be dead by now. The international police and Vietnamese soldiers who were watching the surveillance screen were stunned, and then they all subconsciously looked towards the ventilation vent in the room. Judging from the position where Red Scorpion was shot, there was another soldier on the Chinese side hiding in the central air conditioning vent. How could he crawl through such a narrow space? Outside, the sound of sirens could be heard. Inside, it seemed to be exceptionally quiet. Yi Qian blinked and looked at the handsome face that had suddenly appeared before his eyes. He blinked again and then chuckled softly. Sweat flowed into his eyes, but with the mask on, it was not convenient for him to wipe it off. Looking at him, Yi Qian was breathing heavily, as if he could not catch his breath. Red Scorpion's miserable state was still lingering in his mind, as if it was branded in his mind. Even though she knew that she had made the right choice, just like how she had shot the 2 of them earlier, when she saw the huge, bloody hole on the back of his neck, it hit her heart and made it difficult for her to breathe. What a bold little girl. She was scared. Don't look, girl. Xia Jinyuan, who was standing on the table and using violence to remove the ventilation blades, looked at her palm-sized face that was completely drained of blood. He stretched out his slender hands and said in a voice as calm as the morning bell, "Come, give me your hands." I'll carry you down. Don't look, close your eyes. 2 consecutive shots, especially the gunshot wound on the back of his neck. It was especially terrifying and bloody. This child was scared. Xia Jinyuan, who was suppressing his heartache, grabbed Yi Qian's hands and coaxed her gently, as if he was coaxing a baby. Come, a little closer, I'll hold you. Be good, just a little closer. Chapter 198. He didn't say it out loud for fear of hurting her, so he spoke carefully, as if he was protecting the apple of his eye. Xia Jinyuan's voice not only had the power to penetrate the darkness, but it also had the effect of calming people's hearts. Yi Qian thought to himself as he blinked his eyes. He exhaled a mouthful of foul air that seemed to be stained with blood. When he saw Junia's worried eyes, he smiled slightly. I'm fine. It's just my first experience, so I'm still in the process of adjusting. She had shot 2 people in a row previously because she knew that if she was discovered, both she and Gao Yang would die. She had no choice but to deal with the enemy and save her own life. This time, she was fully prepared, but she still overestimated herself. Yi Qian reached out and grabbed his hand tightly. He smiled bitterly. Captain Xia, I want to take off my mask and take a breather. There's sweat in my eyes, and it's uncomfortable. It wasn't as if she didn't sweat during training, but she couldn't help it this time. There was no smoke in the room, so it was fine for her to take a breather. Her soft voice made Xia Jinyuan's heart ache. This girl was too strong, so strong that it made his heart ache. Okay, take it off and take a breather, he replied gently. He put down his hand and gestured for his comrades below to open the windows and let in some fresh night air. Su Yu and the others heard her words and could hear the slight tremor in her voice. A 14-year-old girl should be wearing a beautiful floral dress with her black hair tied up high. She should be the apple of her parents' eye. This girl, even if she was afraid, she still knew how to comfort the men first. K7 turned around and opened the tightly shut windows to let the night breeze in and disperse the stench of blood in the room. Perhaps this would make this 14-year-old girl, who was as brave as a soldier, feel a little better. When she took off her mask, Xia Jinyuan saw her pale face and pale lips. His heart felt like it was being pricked by needles. Come, let's sit aside and take a breather. The space here is too small, so it's not comfortable to lie down. Without the love and protection of her parents, how could she be so strong today? How could he not feel sorry for her? Yi Qian rubbed his eyes gently and breathed in for a while. After he felt a little better, he moved forward. As soon as he popped his head out, he felt several nervous gazes looking at him. Lowering his head, he saw a few young soldiers of about the same height, wearing the Army's Special Forces uniform, staring at him without blinking. While he was sizing up the room, the wardrobe door that was supposed to be closed suddenly opened. 2 Vietnamese soldiers walked over, and the smell of smoke grenades and tear gas filled the room. Yi Qian, who was not wearing a gas mask, felt a sharp pain in his eyes in just a few seconds. Then, tears flowed out uncontrollably, stream after stream. Xia Jinyuan's eyes turned sharp, and he said in a cold and sharp voice, "Back off." Not only did his voice carry the authority of a soldier, but it also carried an irresistible deterrence. The Vietnamese soldiers who came in carelessly shrank their necks and subconsciously shrank back into the room behind the wardrobe. K7 walked over, touched the wardrobe door, and fixed it in place. He said, "Take him down first, then send him to the hospital for a checkup." Chapter 199. He looked up at Yi Qian, who was tearing up because of the smoke from the tear gas grenade. A trace of pity flashed through his eyes. "I'm going to see Coach Joseph. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Coach Joseph was the Russian soldier who had set up the sniper rifle in the opposite building. He had come to the Chinese army to train the soldiers. Yi Qian, who was crying with her eyes closed, recognized K7's voice. When she could open her eyes, K7 walked away from the window. "You're so touched. Come on, let me give you a hug." J5, who was standing on his tiptoes, tried to stretch out his arms to signal Xia Jinyuan to carry the girl down and put her in his arms. Yi Qian knew it was J5 from his voice. She also heard Xia Jinyuan reply with a faint smile. How many good sisters do you have? How many more brothers do you want to be? He then whispered in her ear in a voice that only the two of them could hear. Close your eyes and let out all your fear. Yi Qian, who had put on the gas mask again, didn't answer. She couldn't cry either. She was being held in his arms. The awkwardness now exceeded the discomfort she felt before. Downstairs, Su Yu, G3, and J5, who were standing by the table and looking up, raised their hands, ready to receive Yi Qian at any time. No need. You guys clean up the scene. I'll take her out first. Xia Jinyuan, who was holding Yi Qian in his arms, didn't ask for help from his comrades. He jumped down steadily and left the scene without looking back. G3 looked up and said to J5, "Is he coming to our team?" "Yes, the king of soldiers." J5 pulled on his helmet and looked at the slender figure leaving. He said with interest, "That's right. I heard he's only 20 years old. His personal information is confidential. Other than the political commissar, no one knows. His background is not simple." He clicked his tongue. Under the gas mask, his peach blossom eyes were shining. Q King is not bad, but I think that little girl is better. His IQ is high, and his courage is unique. So you didn't know any of these people. He was sent from the Yun province's armed police border defense force. Standing next to these soldiers, who were of the same height, he was secretly surprised and said in a deep voice, "I'm afraid the other target has heard the news and didn't appear in this transaction. This time, I'll have to trouble you all. On behalf of the Yun province's border defense police, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you." This was a matter of Yun province. Xia Jinyuan and the others were actually providing support. "We won't be separated. We won't be separated. We're all one family. What's there to thank?" J5 laughed heartily as he spoke, pointing at Red Scorpion's corpse. "Let the Vietnamese army take care of this themselves. Let them bring this student back as well. Our final mission. Let's go, my comrades. Let's go meet the insufferably arrogant white commander." After waiting for a few minutes, the Vietnamese army and international police came in. All they saw was a Chinese soldier, a hostage rescued by the Chinese soldier, and Red Scorpion's corpse. After watching the two special forces soldiers leave the window, Suyu turned around and began to talk to the Vietnamese army. The international police ran to the open window and looked down. They found nothing. The Chinese soldiers who appeared on the surveillance screen had suddenly appeared and mysteriously retreated. It was as if they had never appeared. Chapter 200. The night breeze with the smell of gunpowder blew in through the open window. Outside, the sirens were still ringing through the night sky. The international police officers standing by the window leaned their whole bodies out of the window, but they did not see the other Chinese soldiers who were confronting them, nor did they see the Chinese soldiers hiding in the ventilation vent. "Sir, they have left," someone on the intercom said softly. He was telling the commanding officer at the scene, "I'm sorry, we're still a step too late." He disappeared into thin air, leaving not even a trace behind. During the confrontation just now, the Chinese soldiers were all wearing gas masks, so it was impossible to see their faces clearly. Now, there was no way to know where they had gone. This feeling caused them to feel a chill in their hearts. There was an uncomfortable feeling pressing down on their hearts, but they had no one to complain to. Were the Chinese soldiers weak? Were they really weak? No one could answer. Only they could answer themselves. The commanding officer at the scene was momentarily stunned. Disappeared? Disappeared? God, when did the international police officers become unable to find a few living people? Xia Jinyuan, who was carrying Yi Qian, had already escaped several waves of police officers who had entered the building. He stopped by the side of the elevator that had started operating and saw a few Australian police officers who were investigating the scene walk out of the elevator. He hid in the dark and waited until they left before walking out. Little did he know that Yi Jian, who had been in his embrace all this time, had already become dizzy. Not only was her head dizzy, but her little face was also flushed red like a peach blossom, and it was crimson red. The air in the building was not very good. When the international police officers rushed in, they threw smoke grenades everywhere as if they were free. Now that it was over, the air was still filled with smoke. Yi Qian guessed that he had stayed in the building for too long and that the gas mask he was wearing was not working. Otherwise, why would he feel so dizzy? The dizzy Yi Qian was like a little turtle hiding in its shell, using this method to hypnotize himself. When he was about to walk out, Yi Qian calmed himself down and coughed softly. "Captain Xia, I can walk on my own. You don't have to carry me all the time. I'm not used to it. Are you sure your legs aren't weak?" Although he was joking, he still respected Yi Qian's wishes like a gentleman. He bent down slightly and put her down. "If you can't walk, just let me know. I still have the strength to carry you." She was very light and very thin. The first feeling he got when he held her in his arms was that she needed to be well-nourished. Yi Qian instantly felt that his breathing had become much smoother after leaving his embrace and losing the warmth of his body. His mind, which had felt like it had been stuffed with cotton, was no longer as dizzy as before. He gradually regained his clarity. As expected, a dangerous man really couldn't get too close. She was held in his arms like he was protecting a treasure. Her entire body was floating. When her feet landed on the ground, it was just as he said, her legs were a little weak. However, it was absolutely impossible for her to admit that her legs were weak. He smiled. "If I really can't walk, I won't be polite with Captain Xia." She wouldn't be polite with him. That would be strange. This little girl was as cunning as a fox one moment, as a fish the next moment, and as pitiful as a little rabbit the next moment. It was really difficult to understand what she was thinking. "Okay, you're welcome to be polite at any time." Hearing that her tone had regained its usual indifference, Xia Jinyuan, who was slightly relieved, regained his sense of humor. "You must know that as a man, I'm born to serve beautiful girls. Little girl, I'm always welcome to be polite with you." Chapter 201. The humorous Xia Jinyuan is back. Yi Qian breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. His vigilance, which had gone off somewhere, instantly returned. The elegant and humorous Xia Jinyuan was the Xia Jinyuan he was most familiar with. Just as he secretly thought this, Major Xia, who had regained his humorous demeanor a second ago, became exceptionally serious in the next second. He took off his gas mask and stood under the faint light. His handsome face appeared exceptionally cold, and his eyes were like cold stars as he stared coldly at the exit in front of him. "I'll cover for you later and divert their attention. J5 and the others have already left. It's not suitable for the members of our operation group to appear in public, and you, little girl, can't show your face either, because all the international police outside think that you've already been rescued and sent to the hospital along with the other kidnapped Chinese student." After Gao Yang came out, the Chinese soldier told the international police in order to protect and hide Yi Qian. After all, Yi Qian was only a student who could inform the police of Red Scorpion's activities in the hotel. Moreover, no one would believe that Red Scorpion, which was a headache for the international police and the Vietnamese military, would actually die at the hands of a high school student like Yi Qian. It wasn't because they were afraid that others wouldn't believe them, but because they were worried about Yi Qian's personal safety. The entire building was filled with international police officers. Yi Qian, who was a few steps behind, saw Xia Jinyuan walk in and was stopped by the police officers standing behind the police cordon for routine questioning. He didn't say a word and directly stretched out his arm. A brightly colored miniature version of the national flag with 5 golden stars made the interrogating European police officer stand at attention, raise his hand, and salute. He didn't ask any more questions and let the interrogating officer in. He also had a walkie-talkie hanging in front of his chest. Xia Jinyuan pointed at the walkie-talkie and smiled politely. "I need to borrow your walkie-talkie to say a few words to your commanding officer." "Of course." The police officer didn't hesitate at all. He looked at the Chinese soldier with admiration in his eyes and handed the walkie-talkie over. After Xia Jinyuan thanked him, he took it and leaned to the side to block the police officer's view. At the same time, he was able to see Yi Qian's movements. He restrained his polite smile and no longer spoke in a warm tone. Instead, it was filled with an inviolable coldness. It was the hard and cold expression of a Chinese soldier. He said to the international police commander on the scene, "Please tell your commander-in-chief that the thing he wants is in the hands of our soldiers. If he wants to get it, please apologize to our soldiers first." His voice was piercingly cold and resounding, striking the hearts of everyone present. He spoke in standard American English, and anyone with a walkie-talkie could hear him. At the same time, his words made the European police officers who had once thought that the Chinese soldiers were incompetent feel ashamed. If he dared to say such words, he definitely needed to have a certain level of confidence. Xia Jinyuan returned the walkie-talkie to the European police officer, who was already embarrassed. He smiled again and did not forget to maintain his politeness and said, "Goodbye." His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to attract the attention of the police officers on duty. They saw Yi Qian stick close to the wall and nimbly hide behind a tree. She didn't immediately come out. She was like a little fox that came out of its cave. After looking around vigilantly, she lightly jumped across the warning line parallel to the green ribbon and successfully avoided the sight of the police officers. Watching her leave, Xia Jinyuan's lips curled up slightly. She's strong and agile. No wonder she's a reserve soldier trained by a first-class sergeant and the world's best sniper. Chapter 202. After setting up the cordon, Xia Jinyuan walked out and saw Yi Qian hiding behind a tall wall from the corner of his eye. He walked over with a gentle smile in his eyes. The ambulance, arranged by the Chinese side, drove over under his instructions. The doctors and nurses in the ambulance were all from the embassy. After Yi Qian got into the ambulance, they immediately gave her a simple checkup. After they were done, they gave Xia Jinyuan an okay hand sign to indicate that everything was normal. The two of them sat in front of the ambulance and pulled down a layer of cloth. Xia Jinyuan casually placed the gas mask to the side. He looked at the little face in front of him that had regained some color. His thin lips curved into a perfect smile. "Your heart rate is correct. It looks like you're really not afraid anymore." Major Xiao's smile was very lethal. Just now, she had been dizzy from his minty scent, and now she saw his warm smile. What a dangerous man. Yi Qian lowered her head silently. She rubbed her wrists and smiled. "Yes, I'm not afraid anymore if I don't think about it. Little girl, congratulations. You're one big step closer to becoming a qualified soldier." He smiled faintly. He raised his hand and gently rubbed her head. His voice became more serious. "Also, even though I can't reward you for this operation, your achievements will be forever recorded in the military files. Everyone will be proud of you." Yi Qian was only 14 years old. She had gone through a kidnapping, sacrificed herself to save others, participated in an operation, and fearlessly killed the top target. At 14 years old, she had done things that no one else her age could surpass. Yi Qian felt that this was good. She nodded and said calmly, "This is good enough. I don't need to be rewarded, and I don't need too many people to know about it. This is very good. The glory that belongs to you will always belong to you. Accepting everything calmly will make it easier for you. Little girl, you have a very good attitude." Yi Qian was indeed very suitable to join the military and become a soldier. At the hospital, when the 4 guards sent by the embassy saw the ambulance arrive, they immediately went out to greet it. Inside the ambulance, Xia Jinyuan confirmed that no one was following them before he removed the gas mask from Yi Qian's face. He said in a low voice, "Don't show your face. The embassy guards will escort you back to the hotel. When you go back, don't tell anyone about what happened tonight. I still have things to deal with here. I'll come back tomorrow afternoon." He patted Yi Qian's head gently. "Have a good rest, and think about tomorrow's exam." Yi Qian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I thought you would ask me to rest and not take my exam tomorrow's exam. Little girl, the exam is the most important thing for a student. Don't think too much." When Xia Jinyuan heard this, his handsome face smiled deeply. He saluted the 4 guards and returned to the ambulance without looking back. When Yi Qian came out of the ophthalmology department, he saw Director Li pacing back and forth in the white corridor. A middle-aged man with a cold expression was sitting in a chair. It was Gao Yiyang's father. He had specially come to thank Yi Qian. He was shocked the young girl could remain calm in such a situation and give the opportunity to leave to a boy. This was a hospital that the Gao family had a large stake in. When Gao Yang's father asked the doctor about Yi Qian's condition with a serious expression, Director Li's eyes were already filled with tears. "It's good that you're fine. If you didn't come back, I would have been lying in the hospital." Chapter 203. It's fine. We're all with our own people. Let's go, Director Li. It's too late, and we still have exams tomorrow. Yi Qian smiled. At this moment, even though the hospital was filled with the smell of disinfectant, she still felt refreshed. After Father Gao understood the situation from the doctor, he turned his head and saw the teacher and student preparing to leave. He quickly caught up to them. "Director Li, this female student, it's too late. I'll get the driver to take you back." It was almost 1 a.m. No matter what, he couldn't let the female student who saved his son's life leave by herself. This time, Director Li didn't refuse. Father Gao seemed to be relieved. His cold gaze fell on Yi Qian's face, and he revealed a gentle smile. "You're willing to give life to others and leave danger to yourself. I want to ask for money to express my gratitude. To you, it's a form of humiliation. But if I don't express my gratitude properly, I'll feel uneasy. Student Yi Qian, how about this? I'll use your name to provide a scholarship of $1 million to a middle school student in a disadvantaged area. What do you think? A scholarship of $1 million. Director Li faintly sucked in a breath of cold air. A scholarship of $1 million multiplied by 8 times the current exchange rate. Director Li, who had finally calmed down, felt like she had to take another heart-strengthening pill. The exchange rate in July 1995 was 1 million. It was a lot of money. After calculating in her heart, Yi Qian, whose eyes were already curved into crescents, said generously, "Actually, I also need money. After all, the amount you're offering is quite tempting. However, it's pretty good as a scholarship. I'm very grateful for your generosity. I think I should also study hard for your scholarship." Her gaze was open and her eyes were clear. Even though she said she needed money, he still felt that she was natural and unrestrained. This made Father Gao's impression of Yi Qian even better. He let out a rare laugh and sighed. "People die for money, and birds die for food. This has never changed since ancient times. But a gentleman who loves money has a right way of obtaining it. Not only do you have a good character, but you're even better. Okay, Uncle will set up a scholarship for you. As long as you do well, this scholarship will be yours." "You're thinking too highly of me." Yi Qian really didn't expect Father Gao to think so highly of her. She smiled politely and replied, "There are many outstanding students in our country who can't go to school because of tuition fees and family burdens. I think they need the scholarship you set up." After a brief moment of shock, Father Gao said, "How about this? I'll set up a charity organization that provides scholarships for outstanding and impoverished students in the country. We'll mobilize the overseas Chinese to contribute to the future of our country. What do you think?" This was indeed for the best. Our country does need such a charity organization. We also need the help of overseas Chinese from all over the world. Yi Jian reached out her hand like an adult and said with a sincere expression, "Thank you very much for your help. With your help, more students will be able to enter the school." An important matter was settled just like that. Director Li, who had not interjected at all, was dumbfounded. Gao Yang was still under the effects of the tranquilizer. Gao Yang's father promised to send him to the hotel at 7:30 a.m. sharp the next morning. After that, Director Li left with Yi Jian in the car. Chapter 204. Don't think about anything when you get back. I asked Teacher Yu to warm some calming tea for you. Drink it when you get back. Mr. Gao had been present just now, so Mr. Li had restrained himself a little. But now he began to nag. He was still worried that something would happen to his student, so he kept comforting him. "Everything's over now. We came back safe and sound. You just treat it like a dream. When you wake up tomorrow, nothing happened." Yi Qian didn't interrupt, but listened with a smile. Occasionally, she would obediently say okay. She didn't have the coldness of a gun-wielding girl anymore. She was completely an obedient girl. When they returned to the hotel, they didn't disturb the other students. Whether it was the Chinese students or the students from other countries, they didn't know that Yi Qian and Gao Yiyang had gone through a disaster. What happened in the middle of the night didn't affect the contestants who went to bed early. The next morning, Yi Qian appeared in front of her classmates, as usual. No one knew that she had returned to the hotel at 1 in the morning. When Yang Yi saw her, she immediately came over. "Dear, can I sleep with you tonight? I found out that I'm sleeping in the same room as teacher Yu. Why do I have insomnia? You don't have freedom and romance anymore, do you?" Yi Qian smiled and saw through her thoughts. "The first night, I slept with you. I helped you pick up your books twice in the middle of the night. You're quite relaxed. Tell me, where did you hide them?" Before coming to Australia, the 4 teachers had specially checked the students' luggage, afraid that the students would bring books that had nothing to do with them. In the end, there were still some that slipped through the net. Yang Yi, who was startled, looked around guiltily and pulled Yi Qian to a corner. "Oh my, you even found out. Good sister, I'll definitely thank you when I get back to the capital." The students hadn't all arrived yet, so the 2 of them huddled in the corner and whispered. Hurried footsteps sounded, and they heard Gao Yiyang ask the other students, "Did Yi Qian come down? Did you see her?" "Yi Qian? No, I didn't see her after I came back from looking for you last night." Wouldn't he be suspicious if he looked for her in such a big way? Yi Qian leaned over to take a look. Seeing that he was about to ask the other students, she quickly raised her voice. "I'm here? What's the matter?" "This Gao Yang, looking for you early in the morning is like looking for his mother. TSK, TSK, TSK. I'm afraid there's something urgent. I'll go eat breakfast first." As Yi Qian snickered, Yang Yi waved at Gao Yang, who was striding over. Come, come, come. Over here, over here. I'll abdicate my position, and you can talk." On the other hand, Gao Yiyang, who was supposed to arrive at 7:30, was only staring at Yi Qian. He didn't even spare Yang Yi another glance. After he hurried over, he lowered his voice and said, "You came to the hospital last night, but I didn't know anything. I'm sorry, Yi Qian." His eyes were still red, as if he had just cried. His expression was also somewhat haggard, as if he had not slept well the entire night. "I'm fine. It doesn't matter if you know or not." Yi Qian saw that more and more students were coming and going. He pointed downstairs and said, "Let's talk outside. We can't let anyone know about this." It could be considered a secret between her and Gao Yang. They didn't leave the hotel. They were right in front of the fountain. With the sound of the fountain as a cover, and with the volume lowered, it was a very good place to talk. "I'm fine here. You don't have to worry. But you, why do you look like you didn't sleep well last night?" Perhaps it was because of last night's experience, but when Yi Qian looked at him again, he wasn't as cold as before. He could even stand and talk to him calmly. "It's not a big deal. Yesterday's matter should be fixed on yesterday. Take me, for example. If I don't think about it, it won't affect me." Chapter 205. Under the sunlight, her eyebrows and eyes shone brightly. Her skin was so fair that it seemed to glow like a pearl. What made him unable to look away were her bright eyes. Just like last night, they carried a coldness that he had never seen before. Her gaze was like an arrow that pierced straight into his heart. He couldn't help but listen. He couldn't resist. Yi Qian was so unfamiliar that it was as if they were meeting for the first time. Also, the way she held the gun made it seem like she was used to holding a gun, no different from a police officer or a soldier. Skilled marksmanship, shooting without hesitation. Calm response, nimble handling. She was not the Yi Qian that occasionally bickered with Yi Ying in school. After the sedative wore off, he woke up and didn't sleep again. He thought a lot and recalled a lot. In the end, he came to the conclusion that she had been hiding her true self in school. There were so many things he wanted to ask, but every time, he couldn't get them out. After pursing his lips for a while, Gao Yiyang said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I don't have anything to do. I just came over to thank you. Last night, if it wasn't for you, I don't even know if I would have made out alive." After a slight pause, she looked at her distant face and sped up her speech. "Thank you, Yi Jian. I was too reckless in the past, and like to take things out of context. I misunderstood you again and again. Fortunately, you're a great person who doesn't mind my mistakes and didn't hold it against me." He laughed self-deprecatingly, revealing the innocence that a boy should have. "Now I know how ridiculous I was in school. I jumped around in front of you like a clown and didn't even realize it. If you wanted to talk about this, then there was no need." Yiqian smiled faintly and interrupted, "It's not a big deal. I'm not that magnanimous, but I won't fight over the usual disputes and misunderstandings to the point where it's a matter of life and death. As for Ying, I'll say the same thing again. Don't mention her in front of me in the future. I really can't like her." When she mentioned Ying, her tone was cold. It was obvious that their relationship was quite bad. The only difference was that she never gossiped about Ying. Just as her father had said, sometimes it wasn't just about looking at a person, but also about thinking with one's heart. As for Yiqian, if she didn't like someone, she would say that she didn't like them. She had never heard her talk about others behind their backs. She finally understood that such a person was rare and valuable. Smiling, his inexperienced, handsome face had a trace of soaring spirit. His unperturbed eyes lost a trace of coldness and gained a bit of color. "Okay, I won't mention it again. You haven't had breakfast yet, right? Let's go." Putting aside her previous prejudice, Gao Yang was indeed a friend worth befriending. Oh, this would explain why Gao Yang did not get together with Ying. She probably left without hesitation after seeing Yi Ying's true face. When they reached the cafeteria, they bumped into another Vietnamese student, as well as the only son of the high official who was kidnapped by Red Scorpion last night. When he saw Yiqian, his eyes clearly shrank. He pursed his lips and silently took a step back. This step back made the other two Vietnamese students who had appeared in the Red Scorpion room together involuntarily take a step back, allowing Yiqian and Gao Yang to pass. When they passed by, Yiqian suddenly stopped. Her gaze fell on the boy who was hiding at the back, trying to minimize his presence. He was the boy who caused her and Gao Yang to be kidnapped. Chapter 206. Her pause immediately made the three boys nervous. They didn't even dare to raise their heads, much less pass Yiqian and leave. In reality, Yiqian had only stopped for a moment and left without even saying a word. However, it was precisely because of this that the three of them didn't even dare to breathe loudly. She seemed to be looking at the boy at the back, but in reality, she was sizing up the only son of a high official from the corner of her eye. The only son of a high official. He kept appearing in Red Scorpion's room. In her previous life, she had also seen on the news that high officials were involved in these drug-producing countries. That pair of hands that seemed to be protecting one side was actually dirtier and darker. Xia Jinyuan and the others should know a little about it. However, this was a matter of the Vietnamese and had nothing to do with outsiders. There were 3 days of exams in a row, and the competition in the final exam today was even more intense. Everyone competed to answer the questions, and the entire process was broadcasted live by Australian television. This allowed the Australians who were paying attention to the mathematical Olympiad to see the elegance of the students from each country. The Vietnamese students were not doing well today. Sometimes, even if they managed to grab the questions, they would lose due to a small mistake and end up at the bottom. The competition was the fiercest in China, America, England, and Korea. The students from these 4 countries were all fighting as if they were wearing armor. They were all calm and collected. If there was even the slightest mistake in the middle, the other students would immediately snatch the points back. When it came to mental arithmetic, the gap between them was immediately widened. The first to lose was England, then Korea. In the end, only the Chinese and American students were competing on the stage. The situation suddenly reached an unprecedented level of tension. The atmosphere in the audience was like the air had frozen. Even the announcer who was reporting the live broadcast had a serious expression on her face. Unfortunately, although the Australian contestants tried their best, they were eliminated in the end. However, we are all proud of them because, to be honest, I believe that at least 90% of the people in the country can't do those questions. Up until now, our broadcast room has only received 4 correct answers, and they were all answers provided by adults. The announcer's expression was serious, but her hosting style was humorous. Even if it was her own country's students being eliminated, she still felt that it was a great thing. Below the stage, the teacher's expressions were solemn. Watching the final confrontation between the Chinese and American students, they all held their breaths, waiting to see what the final outcome would be. Theory and mental calculation were carried out simultaneously. Even if the adults watching the live broadcast were confused, they could still feel how fierce the competition in the examination room was. The Chinese and American students did not give in at all. The students' mental calculations and answers were like calculators. Their verbal and logical abilities were extraordinary. The calmness and confidence they displayed when they defeated their opponents pushed the entire competition to the climax. Director Lee sat on the stage with his arms crossed. His expression looked very calm, but in fact his hands were clenched tightly under his armpits. His palms were already sweaty. Our country's Olympiad started relatively late. We only joined this competition in 1985. Team competition has always been our country's strength. This time, we came with the determination to win the team gold medal. Therefore, when the rest of the opponents were defeated and only one opponent was left, Director Lee did not even dare to blink. He stared at the stage, afraid that he would miss the slightest bit. 5 hours later, when the time was up, the Americans shrugged their shoulders regretfully. The Chinese team had won 3 gold medals, while the Americans only had 2. Chapter 207. In this mathematical Olympiad, the Chinese team once again stood out. The individual gold medal and team total score were among the best. When the results were announced, Director Lee stood up with a whoosh and strode to the examination room to give all the contestants who had persisted for 5 hours a warm hug. The audience also applauded continuously. This was for all the students. Regardless of success or failure, the spirit of the students' hard work was worthy of praise. Father Gao, who had never attended his son's parent-teacher conference and had never even been to his son's school, had tears in his eyes. As a middle-aged man, there was a trace of gentleness in his love for family compared to when he was young. He really didn't know that his son was so outstanding that he was so proud of him. A fierce competition ended with the contestants shaking hands with each other and a gentle smile on their faces. The mathematical Olympiad ended. Yi Qian received the gold medal that she had obtained in 2 lifetimes. She, who had always been calm and composed, was also slightly red-eyed. In her previous life, she had gone through hardships but still could not escape from Yi Ying's persecution. In this life, she finally did not need to look at Sun Dongqing and Yi Ying's faces and live carefully. She could stand upright and no longer suffer from that cowardice. The continuous applause was like flowers that appeared on the roadside when you walked through a thorny road. You could stop to feel the joy, but never forget that a wonderful life could not be stopped because of this. Yi Qian, Yang Yi, the 2 girls stand in front. The boys stand on the left and right. Take a group photo together. Below the stage, Director Lee, who had a face full of pride, and the staff sent by the embassy took the first group photo of all the students in Australia. When the 12 contestants began to visit the scenery of the University of Sydney, this photo had already been sent back to China by the embassy staff. Yi Qian and the others had not yet returned from Australia. In China, the news that the Chinese team won the most gold medals in the mathematical Olympiad team and the individual gold medals swept across the country like a spring breeze. Even the People's Daily, which had the largest circulation, reported it and accompanied the contestants' performance on the stage. Yi Zhifan was the deputy mayor, and the People's Daily was the paper he had to read every time. When he saw the photo that occupied the most important section of the People's Daily, his gaze suddenly froze. Then he looked at the name attached. His originally relaxed brows suddenly furrowed, and his expression had changed greatly. He had just arrived at work. He picked up his briefcase from his desk, clenched the newspaper in his hand, and strode out of the office. A government worker saw that he seemed to have left in a hurry and asked kindly, "Deputy Mayor Yi, there are still 10 minutes before the meeting. What are you?" "Postpone the meeting for an hour. I have something urgent to attend to." How could he be in the mood for a meeting? Yi Jifan didn't even look back. He left the office building with a gloomy face and sped home on his motorcycle. After breakfast, Sun Dongqing took Yi Ying to the streets to buy groceries. When they came back, they happened to meet the villagers of Shuka village. At this time, they were already proudly talking about Yi Ying's results in the midterm exam. It's not that I want to praise my Ying Ying, but this child is very sensible. Old Yi and I have never had to worry about her studies. As a matter of fact, he was one of the top few students in the entire cohort during the final exam. Everyone says that all things are inferior and only education is good. My Ying Ying is not a boy, but in what way is she inferior to a boy? During this period of time, Sun Dongqing was a little arrogant again. It was said that Yi Jifan was very likely to become the mayor, and her daughter was very capable. Wherever she went, she held her chin high. Yi Jifan, who was riding his motorcycle all the way, happened to see his wife chatting with the villagers. His gloomy face was almost squeezed out of water. Chapter 208. The women from the same village would more or less interact with Sun Dongqing. After all, she was the wife of an official. Sometimes, if they wanted to do something, it was difficult to find Yi Jifan, but it was definitely not a problem to find Sun Dongqing. Sun Dongqing was greedy and liked to listen to flattery. Sun Dongqing was both. My old Yi always says that even though my Ying Ying is not a man, she will definitely not be bad in the future. Next year, she will definitely be able to get into the provincial experimental high school and the middle school exams. She will definitely be able to get into Hua University and Shi University. She became more and more enthusiastic as she spoke, her saliva flying everywhere. Even though she was very plump, she really did not match Yi Jifan in terms of temperament. When the women from the same village heard this, they clicked their tongues and exclaimed, "Isn't that so? Who doesn't know that your Yi family is full of talents? And this talent is from your family. Ying Ying is born with good looks and good grades. When she becomes a university student, she will be a golden phoenix flying out of our poor village." Ying liked to hear these words. When she heard this, she pursed her lips and smiled sweetly. "Annie Tao, I know that little brother Little Dong also got into town high school. In the future, little brother Little Dong can look for me in class if he needs anything. If he doesn't know where my classroom is, just ask around and a classmate will bring him here." When Annie Tao met her, she first mentioned that little brother Dong got into town high school and that he would have to worry about something in the future. Yi Ying immediately knew why she was here. Since Yi Qian, that damn girl, made her life in school even more difficult, then she had to think of a way to make everyone in the same village stand by her side. Let's see if she has the face to return to the village in the future. Rumors and slanders killed people. Since she had failed to seduce teacher, she would have to take her time. Yi Ying's smile became even sweeter as a gloomy look flashed across her eyes. She didn't believe that she couldn't win against an orphan. If 1 year wasn't enough, then 2 years. If 2 years wasn't enough, then 3 years. As long as that damn girl returned to the village, she would have a chance. When Annie Tao heard this, she immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Of course not. I say, Dongqing, your Ying Ying is really sensible. No wonder everyone in the village said that the one who had become a demon in the Yi family was actually Yi Ying. Looking at it now, wasn't it true? Yi Jifan had been listening for a while. If it weren't for his status, he would have walked over and taught the mother and daughter who didn't know anything a lesson. His hands tightened on the handle of the motorcycle. Just as he was about to leave, he heard the sound of a car horn behind him. A black Santana stopped next to him. Someone greeted him with a smile. "Deputy Mayor Yi, Deputy Mayor Yi." A Santana stopped, and the person sitting in the back seat came over with a smile. "Long time no see, Deputy Mayor Yi. Isn't this Secretary Wu? Aya, are you going to school?" When Yi Jifan saw who it was, the gloominess on his face disappeared. He walked over with a smile and held Secretary Wu's hand. He said politely, "It's so hot today. Do you have something urgent? Secretary Wu was the leader of the city's education bureau. Annie Tao heard it too. When she looked over, she clicked her tongue and said, Old Yi is really a busy man. That person looks like an official. TSK, TSK, TSK. Dongqing, you're really lucky. Wasn't he a blessed person? Son Dongqing smiled arrogantly. I have to go take a look. You're busy. If you don't return to the village at noon, come to my house for lunch. After that, she pulled Ying over. Chapter 209. Aunt Tao, who had wanted to get closer to her, did not dare to make her stay. Seeing the mother and daughter walk over, she stopped for a while and left. I just found out that you're Yi Qian's uncle. This is really. When Sun Dongqing heard Yi Qian's name, she was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She immediately exploded. Yi Qian? Old Yi, what trouble did that wretched girl get into again? Let me tell you, whether she lives or dies has nothing to do with my family. Wretched girl, ungrateful wretch. If it weren't for my family raising her, she would have been a beggar begging for rice. He spoke quickly and hurriedly, without any pause or buffer. He finished speaking with a crackling sound like firecrackers, but he didn't notice that Ying was already sweating from anxiety. Mom, what are you saying? Ying was afraid that she would say something unpleasant, so she quickly pulled her back and whispered, Mom, Dad's expression has changed, and you're still talking. Why don't you see who the important guest is? You can't say anything nice the moment you open your mouth. Ying was also an expert at reading people's expressions, even though she also liked to let others know more about Yi Qian's scandals. But now, who was the guest? What was he doing here? Why was he looking for Yi Qian? She had no idea. Sun Dongqing was still a little unhappy. How long has it been since that wretched girl showed up? When I asked you, you said you didn't know. When I asked your dad, he wouldn't tell me. Who knows if she got into trouble outside? This wretched girl, she just doesn't. Mom, can you stop talking? Yi Ying's little face was now pale, because Yi Jifan's gaze just now was so sharp that it made her shiver involuntarily. Secretary Wu was talking happily. With Sun Dongqing's reprimand, he could tell that something was wrong. He did not show it on his face, but he smiled and asked, This is Sai. I've embarrassed myself in front of you. This is my wife. She doesn't know anything. All she knows is to take care of her 3 meals a day. The children like to spread rumors about the slightest mistake. It was impossible for him to teach Sun Dongqing a lesson in front of outsiders. People who worked in the officialdom were good at smoothing things over. They didn't need to explain anything, but they could explain everything clearly. Secretary Wu's expression softened a little. He had wanted to say a few more words, but now he was not in the mood. It seemed that he should wait for Yi Qian to come back. He smiled and said, So it's Madame Yi. That little classmate must be Deputy Mayor Ye's daughter. That's right. Come, Ying, say hello to Secretary Wu. How could Yi Jifan not see the change in the situation? The other party was clearly here for Yi Qian, but he could not bring himself to mention it. He had to smooth things over first. In terms of social interaction, Ying had always been polite and appropriate. With Sun Dongqing's previous offense, Ying's actions and words were very dignified. Hello, Uncle Wu. If my mother offended you just now, please don't take it to heart. She was just worried about my sister, so she spoke without thinking. Please don't take it to heart. Yi Jifan, who was suppressing the anger in his heart, saw this and calmed down quite a bit. His daughter was still sensible, but she was still a little narrow-minded. He would teach her slowly in the future. It's normal for a family to be worried. Then I won't disturb you. Deputy Mayor Yi, let's chat again next time. Secretary Wu saw some clues, but for Yi Jifan's sake, he naturally wouldn't embarrass his wife. He said a few words of courtesy, which was considered as giving face to her. Chapter 210. Yi Jifan knew that he couldn't persuade him to stay, so he smiled and said, That's good. You came to the village on such a hot day. You must have something urgent to attend to. I'll have a drink with you when I'm free. After watching Secretary Wu get into the car, Yi Jifan's smile immediately disappeared. He glared at his wife and said to Yi Ying, Look after your mother. I'll deal with you when I get back. It was time for the meeting, so he had to rush back. Ying was always afraid of him. Hearing this, her back broke out in a cold sweat, and she nodded timidly. Suppressing his anger, Yi Jifan didn't even have the mood to attend a meeting. Whenever he thought of his wife's complacent look outside, he felt his heart burn fiercely. He had a belly full of anger that he couldn't vent. Yi Qian, the wretched girl she kept calling, had already gone abroad and won an award. People's Daily even published a photo and highlighted the students who won the gold medal in bold. Yi Qian was one of them. They even used the phrase "turning the tide" to describe Yi Qian's performance in the exam. Let's see if he still has the face to talk about Unyielding's exam results. Let's see if he still has the face to talk about how amazing his daughter is. Let's see if he still has the face to step on Yi Qian's face and make himself look good. Originally, he wanted to come back after work to scold his wife, who knew that after the meeting, he would call Yi Jifan to go to the city. The matter that had been hanging in the air for half a year finally had an answer. He was promoted from deputy to official. On the same day, he had to report to the city and study for half a month. He could only come back when school started. The success of his official career made Yi Jifan temporarily put this matter aside. He packed his luggage and rushed to the city. In Shuku village, Uncle Jin and Principal Chun came back from fishing early in the morning. Both of them were full of smiles. They knew about Yi Qian's results before Yi Jifan did. At the same time, they also knew about the dangerous incident that happened that night. Although it was dangerous, when they thought about how the military knew about it and recorded Yi Qian's achievements in the file, the two elders were pleasantly surprised. Little Yi is brave and careful. Once she sets her mind on something, there's nothing she can't do. Old Man Jin dealt with the big grass carp that he had caught early in the morning and laughed out loud. Even the deep wrinkles on his face looked like blooming flowers. I feel at ease now. Ever since Principal Chun returned from the province, he and Uncle Jin to live in Shuku village and go to the military once a week or so. Hearing that, a smile appeared on his wrinkled face. He sighed and said, "A 4-year plan is a long time, but half a year will pass in the blink of an eye. Little Yi will only be with us for a year. The rest will have to wait until the winter and summer holidays." There was no high school in town. If there was a high school with Little Ye's talent, she would not be held back if she went to high school in town. She was smart and eager to learn. No matter where she went, she wouldn't be bad. Uncle Jin was already laughing. Children grow up. Sooner or later, she'll fly high. She can see further. She just has to come back to visit us occasionally. Don't restrict her. Although the time is short, we'll teach her strictly. If she studies seriously, she'll be admitted to school sooner or later. They removed the scales, dug out the innards, and washed the fish clean. Their lunch of braised fish was inevitable. Chapter 211. The two elders usually talked about Yi Qian. Other than that, they also talked about the training of some soldiers in the army. For the two elders, this kind of topic was their hope and spiritual sustenance. In the hotel, Yi Qian had already packed her luggage. She sat on the bed and looked at the letter that the front desk had just handed her. After a while, she finally tore up the envelope and the letter inside and flushed them down the toilet. It was from Xia Jinyuan. It wasn't a letter, just a few words. He said that he wanted her to rest in Jing City for 2 days and that he could only go back to China after 2 days. So what if he went back to China? Dangerous men were like poison. She couldn't touch them, especially when this dangerous and poisonous man liked to show signs of ambiguity from time to time. This made her even more unwilling to have too much contact with him in her life. Without any hesitation or consideration, Yi Qian maintained her original attitude and insisted on staying away from Xia Jinyuan in her life. After shaking hands with the local Australian students one by one, the Chinese students finally embarked on their journey back to China under the guidance of Director Li and the other 3 teachers. It was 11 a.m. when they arrived in Jing City. Yi Qian didn't plan to stay in Jing City for too long. Her plan was to fly back to the province at 2 p.m. If time didn't allow for it, she would rest in the province for 1 night and take the train back to the city early the next morning. Not only did she have to travel back to town from the city, but she also had to take a bus back to town. Don't think it's over. From town to the village, she still had to take a bus. Old people would probably feel their scalps tingle when they heard this. But for Yi Qian, she couldn't wait to take the train back to the city as soon as she arrived in the province. She was anxious to return home. Director Li tried her best to persuade her to stay in Jing City for a few more days and visit their school, but was rejected by Yi Qian. This made the eloquent Director Li so worried that her hair turned white. "You little girl, why don't you understand?" Teacher Li took a big gulp of water. He wanted to persuade Yi Qian to come down, but when he saw the sly smile in her eyes, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Good girl, are you pretending to be confused in front of your teacher?" He was smart and well-mannered, and he handled the relationship between students quite well. He was not arrogant, and he was not arrogant because of his strengths. He really did not want to give up on such a good seedling so easily. When Yi Qian heard that he wanted to continue, he stopped feigning ignorance. He smiled and said, "Director Li, to tell you the truth, if there was a high school in our town, I would have studied there as well." Why was that? Everyone is racking their brains to get into a top school. Why is it so weird when it's your turn? I can tell you that in the whole of Beijing, our school has the strongest teaching staff. Not to mention Hua University and Shi University, most of the students who study abroad have a bonus. In response to Director Li's well-meaning advice, Yi Qian smiled faintly and replied, "You're honey, you're arsenic." He didn't say anything else. This was something that was completely impossible. He could only thank Director Li for his kindness. "You little girl, you really do have a lot of ideas." Director Li didn't try to persuade her anymore. He sighed heavily and said to the two boys, Gao Yiyang and Wang Yimo, "Take care of the girls on the road. When you arrive in the province, remember to call me to let me know you're safe." Chapter 2:12. Wang Yimo chuckled. "Don't worry, I'll definitely call you." Since the three of them were traveling together, Director Li wasn't too worried. However, he still called Teacher Zhu from the provincial high school, who was responsible for bringing the three of them to school. He told him what time the students would be arriving at the provincial high school and personally escorted them to the departure lounge before leaving. "After I get off the plane, I'll go directly to the train station to see if there are any train tickets back to the city tonight." As soon as they boarded the plane, Yi Qian told Gao Yiyang her plan. "I can go back alone, and I want to go back earlier." She hadn't trained in a long time, so she was very anxious to go back. Gao Yiyang glanced at her and frowned slightly. He pursed his lips and said, "There are tickets. Let's go back together." He didn't hear her mention that if she hadn't been able to get the tickets, she would have gone back alone. "That's fine too." Yi Qian nodded slightly. Although there was no misunderstanding like before, she wasn't very interested in closing the distance between them. It was enough to maintain a casual friendship. Although she wasn't as cold to him as before, she didn't want to be friends either. Gao Yiyang, who realized this, felt a little bitter. He didn't say anything more and closed his eyes to pretend to rest. After Wang Yimo and Yi Qian chatted for a while, Wang Yimo also yawned and closed his eyes to sleep. Only Yi Qian, although she also closed her eyes, her mind was clear. She didn't feel sleepy at all when she thought about how she would soon be able to immerse herself in the intense training. As she wished, when they arrived at the provincial capital at 5:30 p.m., Gao Yiyang immediately called to book the train tickets for 7:45 p.m. The two of them didn't even meet Mr. Zhu and rushed to the train station without stopping. From Australia to Beijing, then to the province, the city, the town, and the village. Yi Qian spent a total of 2.5 days on the road. At noon, the sun was so hot that even the cicadas were resting. The entire village was extremely quiet. Even the dogs were lying under the shade of the trees, panting heavily. When Yi Qian walked into the peach forest with her luggage, Xia Jinyuan stood at the hotel where he and Yi Qian had agreed to meet. "No one contacted you? Are you sure?" Xia Jinyuan frowned and looked at Han Zheng in disbelief. He pressed his lips together and asked, "Are you sure no one called you when you were at the nightclub?" Han Zheng was on the verge of tears. He patted his chest and swore, "Absolutely not. They were watching him 24 hours a day." That little girl of yours definitely didn't contact me. I guarantee it. What was this? Could it be that his brother's words were false? The aggrieved Han Jiang pretended to cry and said sadly, "Why would I lie to you? Let me tell you, that little girl is not interested in you at all. The great young Master Xia also has a time when he is despised by others. My heart is really *king happy." Amidst his childhood friends' gloating laughter, Xia Jinyuan's face gradually tensed up. The little girl didn't come, so the next time they met will be difficult. It might be a few months or a few years. Xia Jinyuan was originally supposed to join the team at the end of the year. Now, because of Operation Pebble, the transfer order was sent to his original unit the day before yesterday, and he would be transferred to the new unit the next day. Each unit was responsible for special missions, such as war zone operations, overseas pursuits, foreign assassinations, intelligence spying, and so on, which are classified as Red Level 1 Snowfield Brigade. Since she didn't come, Xia Jinyuan could only leave Beijing with regret and go to the Snowfield Brigade. Chapter 213. Before leaving, Xia Jinyuan wrote a letter to Yi Tong's school, hoping that she would receive his letter when school started. He left without saying goodbye. Only the little girl was familiar with this kind of thing. He didn't want to learn from her. The letter arrived at school 2 days before school started. After returning to the mountains and arriving at the army, Yi Qian fought with the soldiers all day long. She didn't even miss her daily exercises and training. When she looked up from the target, the days passed by like flipping through a book. In the blink of an eye, it was time to report back to school and usher in the 3rd year of middle school. She still couldn't bear to leave the army, causing the soldiers in the army to laugh and tease Yi Qian, who was like a little sister to them. It was noon when she left. Dozens of people sent her off at the same time. The scene was so spectacular that the regiment commander laughed out loud. He said to the political commissar, "This little girl was born to be a soldier. How can you tell that she's a little girl?" For the sake of training, she cut her silky long hair just like that. Now, she looks just like a boy. He paused and added, "It's just that her skin is a little too pale. She's been under the sun for more than 20 days, but I don't see her tan. If the little girl really turns into a coal under the sun, she'll cry." The political commissar laughed. There wasn't a single female soldier in the army. Even the military doctor was a man. With Yi Qian, the little girl's arrival had the effect of balancing yin and yang. Although ordinary people weren't allowed to enter the military grounds, Yi Qian was different. Even the military took note of her. When they found out that she was here, they even called and told her to teach her well. The little girl had a good temper and was hardworking. She was like a piece of gold in the army, shining wherever she went. Any army would be willing to open their doors and welcome such a talent. More than 10 days passed by quickly. Looking at this group of soldiers, he knew how much they couldn't bear to see her leave. Not only the soldiers, but even he, the political commissar, couldn't bear to see her leave. They walked all the way to the entrance of the barracks. Only then did the soldier, who couldn't go out, pass Yi Qian's luggage to her. He patted her shoulder as if she was a comrade and said with a smile, "Come back on Saturday and Sunday. There are a lot of pheasants in the mountains in autumn. When the time comes, we'll carry the company commander and roast some pheasants." "Okay, then I'll have to bring a few more bags of cumin powder. Sprinkle a handful of cumin powder on it when it's cooked. That's called fragrant." Yi Qian had cut his hair as soon as he entered the army, revealing his exquisite and flawless facial features. His eyes were as dazzling as the stars in the sky, and his smile was as bright as the morning sun. "Wait for me. See you on Saturday morning." Compared to the colorful life outside, Yi Qian loved this blood-boiling land more. When she walked out of the barracks, she turned back to look at the tall figures dressed in army green who seemed to blend into the mountains. Even the corners of her eyes were smiling. One by one, they stood ramrod straight like rows of spears at the entrance of the barracks. Even if it was resting time, they were always ready. In the army, the most common saying was, "Soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in an hour." The most discussed topic was protect the country. No matter what era it was, Those rows of army green figures would always be the most adorable people of that era. After leaving the army at noon, they took a village car to town in the afternoon. The people in the car were either from the same village or from the neighboring villages. They talked about their hometown all the way to town. Chapter 214. My chickens are hanging outside. They can't run away. I have to get them away. When the bus stopped midway, some villagers, under the urging of the conductor, didn't forget to remind them that they couldn't let anything happen to the chickens they brought into the town. The ticket seller was actually the driver's wife. She took the money and said, "Who wants your chickens? They're hanging in the back. It smells like chicken poop. Who can smell in the summer? Get on, get on. Don't dawdle." It was common to see chickens and ducks when visiting relatives in town. There were many students on the bus. They chatted and chatted all the way to town. The buses driving into town were not good cars. They were all old minibuses that had been eliminated by the city. There was no air conditioning in summer and no heating in winter. Everyone sitting in the bus hated that they could not tear down the windows. Gao Yang had been waiting for a long time. There were only 3 buses from Shuku village to town. One in the morning, one in the afternoon, and one in the afternoon. The first 2 buses did not see Yi Qian, so it had to be this bus. Soon, a shabby minibus came from afar. Gao Yang put some money on the counter of the canteen and bought 2 mung bean popsicles. He pushed the bicycle with one hand and walked over, but after a few steps, he stopped. He saw Yi Ying and the mayor's wife, who had been in the limelight for the past 10 days. Yi Qian, who was sitting by the window, got off the bus. He felt that today was not a good day to go out. He saw the fashionably dressed mother and daughter, Sun Dongqing and Yi Ying, getting on the bus. They were talking to a woman who said that she wanted to take care of her chickens. It turned out that the woman's sister was giving birth at the town hospital. The mayor's wife, Sun Dongqing, had helped a little. She was here to thank them personally. Yi Qian did not plan to avoid them. So what if he bumped into them? When they got to school, she and Yi Ying would be in the same classroom. They would not see each other all day. How could she avoid them? Although the sun was setting in the west in the afternoon, it was still hot. Yi Jian glanced at Yi Ying, who was obviously impatient but still had a fake smile on her face. She took her luggage and left the car. Yi Ying had lost her patience. Her father had just taken office and needed the support of the villagers. Would she come out for a few chickens and ducks? Being close to the people, she had no choice. Over the phone, her father had specifically said that she had to make the mother and daughter appear close to the people. Yi Ying, who was waving a paper fan in her hand, said a few words with a fake smile. She looked up slightly and saw a face that she hated for a long time. His gaze suddenly became exceptionally sharp and fiercely swept over as if he were looking at an enemy. Every time she thought about the humiliation at the farm in the suburbs of the capital, she hated that she couldn't tear this face apart in her dreams. Yi Qian. She gritted her teeth and shouted in a low voice. Her cold voice was filled with coldness, but she didn't walk over. She just stared fiercely at him. Even on a hot day, the coldness in her eyes would cause goosebumps. She was still the same. A leopard could not change its spots. Yi Qian curled his lips. Facing Yi Ying's coldness, he returned a cold smile. His smile was as clear as water, filled with indifference and disdain. Sun Dongqing already had a conditioned reflex when she heard the name Yi Qian. She immediately shouted, "Where are you? Where's the wretched girl?" She looked up and saw Yi Qian grabbing his luggage and leaving the bus. She was furious. Like a weed on fire, it instantly started a prairie fire. "Wretched girl, stop right there. Do you still have any respect for your elders? Hey, where did all the reading go? You don't even have any respect for your elders." Chapter 215. After not seeing Yi Qian for a few months and hearing her daughter say that she was bullied by Yi Qian at school today, Sun Dongqing was so pleased with herself that she wanted to teach Yi Qian a lesson. Yi Qian turned a deaf ear. She wanted to make a fool of herself in front of everyone, but she didn't want to. Of course, if she really wanted to make a fool of herself, she wasn't afraid to play along. He ignored her and didn't even look back. He was clearly ignoring her. Sun Dongqing thought about it. Which one of them didn't greet her with a smile in the past 10 days? Only this wretched girl dared to disobey her. She was so angry that she swung her arms and chased after him. Her reaction was so big that it made Yi Ying's heart sink. She thought to herself, this is bad. She hurriedly chased after her and stopped her. She whispered, Mom, we're on the streets. There's so many people coming and going. Don't embarrass Dad. Don't forget, Dad specifically told you not to. The mention of her husband made Sun Dongqing slam on the brakes. Her chubby body trembled a few times under her skirt before she managed to calm down. She glared at Yi Qian's back, her chest still heaving up and down violently. Wretched girl, she's lucky. She cursed in a low voice before she stopped. Yi Jian, who had walked far away, could still hear her bad-mouthing her to the women in the neighboring village. She said that she didn't come back for the whole summer vacation, that she didn't come back at night, and that she didn't know where she went to fool around. She walked quickly and didn't see Gao Yiying, who was pushing his bicycle, walk coldly behind Yiying. In the past, she only saw one side of it, but now she heard it for real. She saw it with her eyes, heard it with her ears, and felt it with her heart. Only then did she realize that some things were so unbearable. For example, this mayor's wife clearly didn't know anything, but she was still shamelessly talking nonsense and bad-mouthing Yi Qian. No matter how bad Yi Qian's relationship with your family is, at least I've never heard her talk behind her back. He spoke coldly, but his words were like thunder that exploded in Yi Ying's heart. Yi Ying's mind spun rapidly. How much did he hear and what did he know? No, she had to divert his attention. Last time in the suburbs of the capital, he was especially cold to her. This time, she had to salvage her image no matter what. She restrained the shock on her face and slowly turned around to let her eyes be filled with surprise. Using a kind of natural joy that was just right, she said with surprise and joy, When did you come back? Today? Why did you come back so late? Usually, whenever Gao Yang came back from the holidays, the first thing he would do was look for Ying. In the past, I was indeed stupid. Gao Ying looked coldly at Ying, who had pretended that nothing had happened with just a turn of her body. His eyes were filled with mockery, both toward himself and Ying. Hearsay is false, but seeing is believing. For you, I don't only need to use my ears and eyes to verify, I also need to use my heart to observe you. The girl who had handed him a handkerchief when he was at his most embarrassing. Perhaps she had been kind at that moment, or perhaps she had just happened to pass by. She had handed him the handkerchief in order to improve her reputation in front of her classmates. Truth and falsehood, falsehood and truth. He couldn't see through Yi Ying like this, and he didn't want to see through her. The incident at the farm in the suburbs of the capital had already clearly seen her character. Now that she was saying these things, did she expect him to say something to make her apologize to Yi Qian? Chapter 2:16. She was afraid that even if she apologized, Yi Qian would not accept it. Sun Dongqing was confused. This boy was tall, good-looking, and fair. From the way he dressed, she could tell that he came from a rich family. Why couldn't she understand a single word he said? Gao Ying looked at the mayor's wife, who was looking at him suspiciously. She didn't seem to understand what was going on. He pursed his lips and suppressed the words he wanted to say. He said to Yi Ying coldly, You're on your own now. Pushing the bicycle, Gao Ying didn't look at Yi Ying, whose eyes had turned red because of what he said. His cold eyes no longer had the faint joy he had when he saw Yi Ying, because the last trace of love he had for her had been wiped clean by the incident at the farm in the suburbs of the capital. The love between a boy and a girl was always unavoidable. Perhaps only through such experiences would one gradually grow and mature. Gao Ying, what right do you have to say that to me? You bastard. Ying felt wronged. Seeing that he still didn't say anything to her, she couldn't continue to be dignified. She cried out, What do you know? You don't know anything. What right do you have to say that to me? What right do you have to say that to me? Yi Qian was so arrogant in class. He stole everything that belonged to her. Why didn't he stand up for her? Why did he participate in the mathematical Olympiad? He could have helped her deal with Yi Qian, but he didn't. Now, He even helped Yi Qian teach her a lesson. Who did he like? Yi Ying was so angry that she started crying, which made Sun Dongqing panic. Gao Yang. Wasn't this the boy that Ying always talked about when she came home? Even old Yi didn't say anything when he found out. It was as if he had silently agreed to the relationship between the two children. It was said that he came from a very, very rich family. Sun Dongqing, who didn't understand what was going on, didn't even know how to comfort her. She wondered if she should bring the boy back. She looked over and saw Gao Yang catch up with Yi Qian and hand in the popsicle. Great. If she still didn't understand what was going on, she would have eaten for decades in vain. Don't cry, Ying. Mom will stand up for you. Damned hoof. His guts were about to reach the heavens. You shameless thing. Just wait for your mother to clean you up. She's so young, and she already knows how to snatch men. Sun Dongqing, who had misunderstood, cursed in a low voice. For a moment, she forgot about the woman who was still holding the chicken in her hand. At this moment, how could he still remember? If not for Yi Ying crying, she would have chased after Yi Qian and Gao Yang. Yi Ying, who didn't dare to cry out loud on the street, turned around and ran back home. Sun Dongqing wanted to chase after her, but the woman with the chickens in her hands cried out a few times and stood there awkwardly, not knowing whether to leave or not. Just like that, she listened to the whole story. Yo, you haven't left yet. I have to go home. When children quarrel, adults have to worry. Sun Dongqing, whose face had darkened, forced a smile. She said a few words, took the chicken, and hurried home. Yi Ying locked herself in her room the moment she got home. She didn't even come out for dinner. The next morning, she didn't even have breakfast. She went to school with a pair of red and swollen eyes. Sun Dongqing, who hadn't slept the whole night, was afraid that Yi Ying would be late. When she heard the noise, she immediately got out of bed. Yi Ying was just about to go to school when she slammed the door. Damned hoof! Ying Ying was so angry that she didn't even eat breakfast. If I don't tidy up, she really thinks she's going to heaven. She muttered as she tidied up her clothes and hurried out. When the phone rang, she had just finished changing because she was in a hurry to go to school. She ignored it and went straight to school. Chapter 217. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Yi Qian was the first to run to the school. However, Principal Chun was even earlier than her. He held a letter in his hand and stood at the school gate, leisurely waiting for Yi Qian to come over. Not long after, he saw a figure in the school's summer uniform running over. Bathed in the morning sun, the figure was like a young eagle fluttering its wings. Although its wings were still tender, it could already fly freely under the blue sky and white clouds. He took out the letter and read it. When she was about to run past, he hid behind his back with his hands behind his back. His gaze was kind and encouraging as he waited for the young eagle to fly over. Yi Qian, who was drenched in sweat from running, had already seen the elder standing at the school gate. She ran a little faster. You're here so early. Are you here to welcome our new students? The admission of new students has always been handled by Dean Ku. I've been waiting for you. Principal Chun sized up the little girl whom he hadn't seen for a few days. He smiled and said, the army is really good at raising people. You've grown up again. As he spoke, he handed the letter over. Sender, Xia Jin Yuan. Recipient, Yi Qian. Little girl, have you become pen pals with Major Xia? His words were strong and clear, yet he knew how to restrain himself. His words were like his person. This Major Xia seemed to treat little Yi differently. Yi Qian was a little surprised. He wrote to her. She took the letter and read it. It was indeed Xia Jinyuan's handwriting. She couldn't figure out why he would write to her out of the blue. She pretended to tear the letter and read it, but Principal Chun hurriedly stopped her. Read it later. I have something else to talk to you about first. Come, let's go to my office. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the school was still quiet. Registration was in the morning, the freshman assembly in the afternoon, and classes started the next day. The registration time was very tight, which was in line with Principal Chin's style of doing things. When they reached his office, he smiled and said, Secretary Wu from the city's Education Bureau is coming over today. He came over a while ago, but he didn't see you or me. He rushed back to the city for nothing. Make some preparations later and have a good chat with Secretary Wu. This girl had a mature personality and always kept a low profile in everything she did. Even though she had won the grand prize this time, she still acted as if nothing had happened and did what she had to do. Ying, on the other hand, had made it into the top 10 of her grade in the final exam and made it known to the whole town. That child, if she didn't properly educate and nurture him, he might really be ruined by his mother. Yi Qian nodded and said with a smile, "All right, is there anything we need to pay attention to? That way, I can be mentally prepared." She had never experienced these things in her previous life. Even if she had to do it all over again, she had to learn it all over again. Moreover, if there was no need for them to meet, Principal Chun would definitely decline on her behalf. Now that he had personally told her about it, she had to be cautious. No need, no need. It's because of your award in... Principal Chun paused for a second, then the smile in his eyes deepened. Also, it's about setting up an outstanding student scholarship in our city. The organizer, Mr. Gao, specifically mentioned your name to the mayor, saying that you were the one who suggested it. Speaking of this, Principal Chun felt proud. She was able to think of things that others couldn't. She was broad-minded, had a deep sense of righteousness, knew how to refuse, and was able to act appropriately. How could he and Uncle Jin not be proud of such a girl? However, this girl was able to keep her composure and didn't mention a word about it when she came back. No one knew that she had done something big without saying a word. Chapter 218. Yi Qian did not expect Father Gao to act so quickly. She joked, "Then I have to work harder and aim for the scholarship. Who knows, maybe I won't have to worry about tuition fees when I go to university." "Ha, little girl, that depends on what university you go to. If it's a military school, not only will they not charge you a single cent, they'll even give you an allowance." Principal Chen laughed. The little girl could be quite childish at times, and it was very interesting to watch. "Don't worry. As long as you get into a military school, you'll be waiting for a monthly allowance as your living expenses." After laughing, there was some bitterness. A child without parents even had to worry about tuition fees. Fortunately, the little girl was the orphan of a martyr and had no tuition fee for the 3 years of junior high school. Otherwise, Sun Dongqing, the mayor's wife, would probably have to make the little girl quit school and go out to work. It was already past 7 o'clock in the morning, and there were more and more students in the school. The freshmen who came in for the first year of junior high still looked childish. They laughed and played with each other as they entered the campus. Yi Jin came out of the office and walked around the campus for a while. She didn't go back until the classroom door opened. After not seeing her for summer break, her classmates seemed to have grown taller. And Jiasin pounced on Yi Qian from behind like a tiger pouncing on its prey. She laughed and said, "What kind of food did you eat? You grew so fast." The little girl was getting further and further away from Yi Qian. Yi Qian, who had grown up a week ago, had also started the normal process of a girl's development. Over the summer break, she had indeed grown quite quickly. "You want to eat? Don't eat it for breakfast tomorrow. I'll send some over tomorrow. I promise you'll grow taller." Yi Qian turned around and looked at her friend with a smile. After a glance, she laughed even louder. "Did you go to work as a child laborer? You're so tanned. Your face really makes your teeth look so white." And Jiasin, who had gone out with her father for the whole summer break, waved her hand and said boldly, "My father said that it's better to travel 10,000 miles than to read 10,000 books. I followed his expedition team for the whole summer break and was exposed to the elements. How can I not be tanned?" And Jiasin's father was a geologist. Not long after, Zhang Na, Zhang Bin, and the other students who had a good relationship with Yi Qian entered the classroom. Zhou Yao, who was a math enthusiast, was also added in. The few of them sat together to discuss Yi Qian's Olympiad questions, Lagrange's mean value theorem, and Cauchy's mean value theorem. These are things that can only be learned in advanced mathematics. This written exam also covers them. Not only that, there's also a higher-order derivative formula. Leibniz also has it. It can be said that the mathematical Olympiad is not just a middle school level. The difficulty of the questions is quite wide. Yi Qian's expression was a little serious. She had seen a lot and knew why Director Lee said that there was still a big gap between their country's theoretical knowledge and the international knowledge. The foreign students may not know how to do it, but they have all understood it. As for our own students, looking at the shocked faces in front of him, Yi Qian sighed and said, "So, there is still a gap between us and them. Oh my God, this is too difficult. I've never even heard of it. TSK, TSK, TSK. No wonder he was eliminated in the exam. Luckily, he was eliminated. Otherwise, he would be a disgrace abroad." And Jiasin was very emotional. Although her math results were not bad, it was only middle school math. As for high school, advanced. Sorry, she did not understand any of it. Zhou Yao pushed up his glasses and sighed heavily. That's what I thought too. Fortunately, I was selected. It's fine if I lose face in my own school, but if I really lose face abroad, I'll be a sinner. Chapter 219. Go, go, go. You want to be a sinner of the country? You don't have the ability to make the whole country remember your crimes. Zhang Na rolled her eyes and put her chin on the table dejectedly. She said sullenly, "I'm not good at math. What will I do when I get into high school? Yi Qian, you're going to take the provincial high school entrance exam. I'm afraid I can't even afford to take the city's high school entrance exam." There was only 1 year left until the general entrance exam. Although everyone was smiling, the students with good grades were actually feeling a certain amount of pressure. Yi Qian flicked her forehead with his finger and smiled. "You're worrying too much. There's only 1 year left until the general entrance exam. Work hard and get into high school first. Then work hard for the next 3 years and get into university." Easy for you to say. It's easy to get into high school, but getting into university is difficult. While Jiasin was wailing, Ms. Ku and Ying walked into the classroom together. Someone said, "Ms. Ku is here." The noisy classroom quieted down instantly as the students sat at the nearest table. Although Yi Ying's eyes were a little swollen, her complexion was still good. She glanced coldly at Yi Qian's seat and saw a boy in the class. She gritted her teeth and didn't look again. She walked to the seat below the podium and sat down with her back straight. There was no formal class. Ms. Ku started with a bunch of rules and regulations, just like in previous years. When it came to the students who didn't take the exam last semester, she habitually said sternly, "Yi Qian, stand up." Before she could react, she had already called out his name. Yi Qian also stood up quickly. There was a hint of a smile in his eyes. This slip of the tongue, he probably talked about her a lot. "You did well this time. Sit down." Ms. Ku didn't expect to be called out like this. Her expression was stiff, and she was quite unhappy. However, she had no choice but to praise Yi Qian vaguely. And Jiasin snickered secretly. Being a teacher like Teacher Ku, it was amazing. Teacher Ku, who already knew that Yi Qian had won the grand prize in the mathematical Olympiad, didn't want to mention it at all. It was as if she could cover up the truth by not mentioning it. Fortunately, Yi Qian did not care about these things. He allowed Teacher Ku to loudly praise and commend Yi Ying from the podium. He even called on the entire class to learn from her, to have a proper attitude, and to not cause trouble for the teacher all day long. Sun Dongqing had deliberately chosen to come during school hours. She was about to rush into the classroom when she heard Teacher Ku praising her daughter. She shrank back and waited outside. Principal Chun, who came with Secretary Wu, immediately recognized that the woman standing outside the classroom was the new mayor's wife. His eyes narrowed, and a trace of coldness flashed through his sharp eyes. "This is Class 1. In front of us is Class 2. There's no distinction between experimental classes and ordinary classes in the middle school in town." As he spoke, he intentionally guided Secretary Wu into Class 1. Although Fujian Town was only a town middle school, and its teachers were slightly weaker than the ones in the city, there was a military unit here. The children of the military's family members were also studying here. Therefore, the teachers here were quite capable. Secretary Wu laughed. "You're too humble. Many of the top students in our city graduated from your school. This year, 4 students from number 1 middle school were admitted to Tsinghua University. One of them graduated from Fujiantown Middle School. This time, it seemed that there were two more capable students who could get into Tsinghua University and West University. One was Yi Qian, and the other was Gao Yang from Class 3. Chapter 220. Secretary Wu and the others were not the only ones who thought so. Yi Zhifan, who came back with them, also thought so. During the days when he was studying in the city, he lived in fear and trepidation. The municipal director told him in private that he was not supposed to be the mayor. He did not know why, but the day before the letter was released, the municipal committee suddenly appointed him as the mayor of Fujiantown. He said that someone wanted to make him the mayor. After the meeting, the municipal committee secretary asked him to stay behind to show his concern. Before he left, he patted him on the shoulder and said meaningfully, "Xiao Yi, you are still young. You are already the mayor of town at 35 years old. Work hard, and you will have a bright future." It sounded mysterious, but it made his heart skip a beat. This was because he remembered the phone call from a few years ago in the middle of the night. For the past few days, he had been thinking about who was secretly helping him, so he forgot about Yi Qian going abroad to win an award. Who would have thought that he would be shocked by the sudden news yesterday morning? His mind was still in a daze. Yi Qian, she actually persuaded the famous Chinese Mr. Gao Chiliang to set up a scholarship for outstanding students charity program in the province. She won an award and helped solve a big problem in the province. Yi Zhifan rushed back to town with Secretary Wu. He did not see Sun Dongqing at home. He asked downstairs and found out that she had gone to school. His heart skipped a beat, and he sped to school on his motorcycle. Unfortunately, he was still a little late. In front of Principal Chun and Secretary Wu, Sun Dongqing complained bitterly about Yi Qian. "I am worried. I am so worried that my hair is turning white. I didn't go home for the whole summer vacation. No one knows where I went. He clearly saw me on the street yesterday, but he didn't even greet me. This child, Teacher Ku, Principal Chun, I really can't control him anymore." In the classroom, Yi Ying, whose face was pale, looked at her mother scolding Yi Qian in front of the whole class. She said anxiously and angrily, "Mom, stop it. Stop it." He wanted to drag her out, but Principal Chin's sharp gaze stopped him in his tracks. Yi Ying, who couldn't move even half a step, was so anxious that she sat in her seat with tears in her eyes. She watched her mother make a fool of herself, and also she made a fool of herself. Sun Dongqing wasn't stupid, but she had a very fatal flaw. She didn't want to verify anything and only wanted to feel comfortable in her heart. In the past, she had been more cautious. However, as Yi Zhifan's position in the government increased, she became more and more unbridled. Who in this town could be more important than her husband? No, since there wasn't, then everyone in the town had to follow the mayor's orders. Naturally, they had to listen to her, the mayor's wife. If she said that Yi Qian wasn't good, then everyone had to say that Yi Qian wasn't good. "You're too worried. I wouldn't be this tired even if I taught 10 children. My Ying has never made me worry much since she was young. It's just her. My white hair is all because of her. Her parents died early, so I have to take care of her. However, I can't control her. I really can't control her. She left early, didn't go to school, fell in love, and was whispering sweet nothings to a boy named Gao Yang on the street yesterday. This time, I didn't misunderstand. Yesterday, I saw the two of them side by side. They even shared a popsicle. Teacher Ku, you're a teacher. You have to control them. You have to." Chapter 221. Sun Dongqing's behavior had aroused the disgust of the rebellious students from the moment she barged into the classroom and appeared in a high and mighty manner. When they heard her talk about Yi Jian's achievements, she didn't forget to praise Yi Ying as if she was a goddess who had descended to the mortal world. This made more and more students dislike her. Now, she even dared to talk nonsense about Yi Qian and Gao Yang as a couple. It was as if someone had poked a hornet's nest. The entire class was filled with shouts of anger. Zhang Bin was the first to speak. He shouted, "Auntie, you've got the wrong person. Yi Ying and Gao Yang are in a relationship. It has nothing to do with Yi Qian. You're too good at making things up. You're confusing right and wrong. Auntie, you've given us an interesting lesson. Ying, your mother is so amazing. She has a glib tongue. She even scared our principal and teachers so much that they don't dare to interrupt your mother. Their mocking and disdainful gazes made Ying, who was so embarrassed that she wanted to disappear, burst into tears. She lay on the table and didn't dare to raise her head. Sun Dongxing couldn't stand her precious daughter's crying. She felt that the entire class was bullying Ying. She slammed the table and pointed at the boy who spoke first. She said angrily, "What's your name? Who are your parents? Do you have any manners? Don't interrupt when adults are talking." She then said to Ying, "Ying, what are you afraid of? Tell Mom, which of your classmates bullied you? Tell them all." Her reaction made Secretary Wu, who had remained silent, shake his head in secret. Mayor Yi was a capable person. It was a pity that he had such an insensible wife. What a pity, what a pity. Zhang Bin stood up when his name was mentioned. He wasn't afraid of angering her. He said happily, "Andy, I'm Zhang Bin. My dad went to the city and my mom went to a meeting. If you want to find them, you'll probably have to wait until the day after tomorrow." Principal Chen knew him. He had a father who was a policeman and had a strong sense of justice. Principal Chen, who had remained silent the entire time, finally spoke up. "Parent, after hearing what you said, I also want to know if Yi Qian is as you say. How about this? Can I trouble you to sit in the classroom for a while? I need to make some arrangements first." She then turned to Teacher Ku and said, "Teacher Ku, you're the form teacher, and the podium is also where the teacher stands. Please ask this parent to go down and sit down." Miss Ku looked like she was about to faint. She regretted not stopping Sun Dongxing from entering the classroom. She had hoped that Sun Dongxing would stand up for her. Now, she had to clean up the mess. Hearing this, she shuddered and hurriedly said to the furious Sun Dongxing, "Madam Mayor, you can leave first. Isn't Ying crying? Sit down beside her and comfort her." Principal Chun needs to arrange something. Teacher Ku, who vaguely felt that the situation was not very good, was afraid that she would not cooperate, so she quietly pulled her. Does he care about this or not? Is there anything wrong with what I said? A mere principal dares to put on airs in front of me. I want to see what he has arranged. If I'm not satisfied, I'll go to the city and ask the leaders to remove him from his position. For more than 10 days, she had heard too many flattering words. Sun Dongxing did not think of herself as the mayor's wife, but as the governor's wife. Perhaps even the governor's wife was not as arrogant as her. Principal Chun, who pretended not to hear her, smiled slightly and said to Zhang Bin, who had not yet sat down, "Go and find a few PE teachers to bring the TV and video camera in the meeting room into the classroom." Chapter 222. Zhang Bin was a member of the sports committee, so he was familiar with all the teachers. Hearing this, he, who was still in the middle of puberty, let out a hoarse "ah" and jogged out of the classroom. "How about I go to your office and sit for a while?" Seeing this, Secretary Wu whispered, "The mayor's wife has a bad temper. I'm afraid you'll have to put in some effort." Principal Chin smiled and said, "Secretary Wu, you don't have to leave. Just treat it as attending an open class. Last time she just made a scene, and now she's starting again. The mayor's wife is not only bad-tempered, she's asking for a beating. Does she think that the teachers and students are afraid of her? Huh. Unfortunately, Chen Dongfeng isn't afraid. This matter also involved another student, Gao Yang. He then instructed the student sitting next to him, "Go to the third-year class 1 and ask Gao Yang to come over. If the teacher asks, tell him that I'm looking for him. Oh, right. Tell him to go to my office and get the videotape on the table." After everything was arranged, Principal Chun gave Yi Qian a calm-down look and asked Secretary Wu to sit at the back of the classroom. It really was like an open class. Principal Chun asked Fu Dong to go out. I'm guessing he asked Gao Yang to come down. And Jessen's face was livid. She gritted her teeth and said to Yi Qian, "Just you wait. With how much Principal Chen cares about you, he won't let her have it easy." Zhou Liao, who usually didn't care much about class matters, also had a heavy expression. He whispered to Yi Qian, like mother, like daughter. Yi Qian, it's a miracle that you're still alive. Ha, just you wait. There's going to be a good show. Zhang Na sneered. She glanced at Ying, who was sitting on pins and needles. Her heart was laughing even harder. She also didn't like Ying. Yi Qian knew that Principal Chen wouldn't give up so easily this time. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He didn't expect Sun Dongqing to be so arrogant. How could Yi Zhifan, who had a mind of his own, tolerate her ignorance and arrogance? When she heard them talking behind her and feeling indignant for her, she said disapprovingly, "This is nothing compared to what happened in the past. You guys can also learn something from her." Did you vomit? Imitate her? Am I tired of living? Don't disgust us. I'd rather learn from Liao Jian's father than her. Yi Qian, whose expression remained indifferent despite the profanities, smiled faintly and said, "Learn from her how to be a person who doesn't make others hate you. Learn from her how not to be a person who doesn't want to live a long life. This is what she taught you." And Jiasin turned her head and quickly glanced at Yi Qian. She sighed and said, "Classmate Yi, your psychological endurance is really extraordinary. I really admire you." Even the Buddha would be so angry that he would jump up and down after hearing such words, but you were still able to sit still. You even know how to remind us how to be a person who doesn't make others hate us. Student Yi, if I want to study medicine in the future, the first subject of my research will definitely be you. Why is your brain structure so different from ours? The more she didn't care, the more impatient Sun Dongqing was on stage. If this continued, the one who would be at a disadvantage would definitely be Sun Dongqing. Yi Qian, who understood, smiled but didn't say anything. When she saw Gao Yang walk into the classroom with a videotape in his hand, the smile on her delicate lips deepened. TSK, TSK, TSK. No matter how smart Ying was, having an arrogant mother was a tragedy. Chapter 223. Ying was almost out of breath from crying. At this moment, she finally understood why her father reminded her to keep an eye on her mother. She didn't come to school to stand up for her. She was clearly here to make a fool of herself. Listening to the students' mockery, Principal Chen glanced at Ying, who hadn't stood up to speak to protect herself. It would be a lie to say that he didn't feel sorry for her. She was also a smart child, but she had raised such a selfish and narrow-minded person. However, with such a mother, it wasn't strange. Principal Chen, who was determined to dampen Sun Dongqing's spirit, signaled for the students to be quiet. He then asked Gao Yang in a deep voice. Ying's mother said that she saw you and Yi Qian kissing on the streets yesterday. Is that true? Tell me about your relationship with Yi Qian first. Gao Yang, who was unprepared, frowned. He glanced coldly at Sun Dongqing, who had her chin raised. He pursed his lips and said in a deep voice, "I don't know how she saw Yi Qian and I having that kind of relationship. When Yi Qian came back yesterday, I did buy a popsicle for her. As for what happened, it was because I brought back a set of mathematical Olympiad questions from Australia. There was one question that I didn't know how to solve, so I wanted to discuss it with Yi Qian. He had specifically asked his father to find the most difficult set of mathematical Olympiad questions so that he could have more topics to talk about with Yi Qian. He wanted to clear up all the misunderstandings so that she wouldn't have any prejudice against him. But before the plan could even begin, there was already news of him kissing Yi Qian. Sun Dongqing didn't even bother to comfort her daughter. Good boy, he's still so stubborn. She aggressively questioned, "You're so dishonest. I saw it with my own eyes, and you're still trying to deny it. What mathematical Olympiad questions from Australia? You're just a wretched girl. You can't even get into the grade. How can you do Australian questions? Tui, that's clearly an excuse." She pointed her spear at Yi Qian, who didn't respond at all. She shouted, "Yi Qian, stand up and explain yourself. Don't make me clean up your mess all day long. Damn girl, you've been fooling around every day and didn't come back for the whole summer vacation. Could it be that you went out with this guy?" Being unreasonable was also one of her abilities. Yi Qian looked at Sun Dongqing, who was still oblivious to the fact that she had stirred up public outrage. His eyes were full of smiles. If that was the case, it wouldn't matter if he said a few words now. And he has always liked to think too much. Even if I said I didn't, you wouldn't believe me. You love to pour basin after basin of dirty water on me. What can I explain? My explanation is that I don't understand what you're talking about. Why didn't she see that Sun Donching was so stupid in her previous life? Things had already come to this point. Did she really think that Yi Qian would be the one making a fool of herself? What do you mean you don't understand? Just admit that you're in a relationship with this guy. You didn't go home for the entire summer vacation and fooled around everywhere. In Sun Donching's eyes, Yi Qian would never be able to escape from her grasp. Moreover, she was now the mayor's wife. Who would dare to offend her for the sake of a wretched girl without parents? In town, there were indeed people who wouldn't stand up for Yi Qian. However, in school, the first person who wasn't afraid of her was Principal Chun, and the second was Gao Yang. Before Yi Qian could speak, Gao Yang's eyes were filled with obvious disgust. He coldly said, "Auntie, yesterday you said behind Yi Qian's back that she didn't go home for the entire summer vacation. You said that she didn't come home every night. You also said that she's a girl who plays truant, doesn't make progress, lies, and is dishonest. May I ask how honest you are?" Chapter 2:24. She spread unfavorable rumors about Yi Qian everywhere. Didn't she know that rumors were the most fragile? She targeted Yi Qian so much. No wonder Yi Qian hated him in the past. He used to be just like Yi Ying's mother. Guilt gnawed at Gao Yang's heart like a giant ant. He suppressed his anger and said forcefully, "Moreover, Yi Qian didn't live with you. How do you know that she didn't come home every night? Lying? Dishonest? Auntie, are you sure you're talking about Yi Qian and not Ying? Yi Ying, stand up and say it yourself. Who's the dishonest one? When we went to the capital, how did you frame Yi Qian? And how did you frame Yi Qian? Do you dare to say it in front of the whole class?" Just then, a few PE teachers came in with televisions and video recorders. When they heard his words, they all stood at the door of the classroom. What happened? They looked to the back of the classroom to ask for instructions from Principal Chun. Principal Chun waved his hand to indicate that they were busy and let Gao Yang continue the confrontation. Yi Ying, who was lying on the desk, wished that she could faint. Hearing Gao Yang's continuous questioning, her heart was pounding. Panic hit her brain like a tidal wave. How could she stop it? Yi Ying, who was so flustered that she couldn't think at all. No, she had to think of something. She had to think of something. Sun Donching, who had always picked up soft persimmons, was shocked by Gao Yang's imposing manner. She heard her eyelids twitching. She secretly pulled the corner of Yi Ying's clothes and asked in a low voice, "Aren't you going to say something? Do you still want to live in class?" "Mom, if I can't live in class, it'll be all because of you." Yi Ying didn't have time to cry. As she spoke, she gritted her teeth. Her mind was spinning fast. She had to think of a way to get out of this quagmire as soon as possible. Hearing this, Sun Donching was so angry that she almost fainted. "Ying, can't you see that Mom is here to help you vent your anger?" She lowered her voice and said sternly, "Why are you so weak? Let others ride on your neck. I'm here to support you. What are you afraid of? Who told you to come here?" Ying lost her composure. She raised her head and glared fiercely at her mother. "Don't you know that you're just causing trouble by coming here?" His usual cheerful and kind face was nowhere to be seen. His face was gloomy and cold, and even his facial features revealed a hint of ruthlessness. The students sitting around her, especially the students on her right, were frightened by the ferocity on her face. They turned their necks and stared at the podium, not daring to look at her. Ying was so terrifying, and Jiasin was listening with great interest. Suddenly, she saw Ying raise her head. She seemed to have thought of something and stood up. "Ying, don't you have heart disease? You have to hold on. Otherwise, if you have a heart attack, you'll be in big trouble. But you don't look like you're sick. Why don't you explain what happened in the suburbs of the capital? Are you trying to frame Yi Qian again? Huh. If you really did it, I wouldn't be surprised. This is the real Ying. The children were arguing, but Secretary Wu's focus was not on this. He was concerned about another issue. Heart disease? Mayor Ye's daughter had heart disease? Secretary Wu's eyes narrowed. Having a heart disease was not a good thing. The school had to bear a great risk. He leaned to the side and asked Principal Chun, "Is it confirmed?" Chapter 225. According to Mayor Yi, it should have been confirmed. You know that the school won't ask the parents to prove anything for this kind of thing. Principal Chun said casually. From his tone, one could tell that he didn't really believe that Ying had heart disease. Could it be that this kind of thing was faked? What good could it do? Secretary Wu, who was shocked, looked thoughtfully at the mayor's wife who only knew how to protect her own child while trampling on other students. His gaze flickered slightly before he looked away. It seemed that he had to remind number 1 middle school that regardless of whether Mayor Ye's daughter had heart disease, it would be better for her to study at another school. If she didn't study in the city, that would be even better. No school would accept such a troublesome parent. Moreover, if she really did have heart disease and something went wrong, the entire school would be so disturbed that classes couldn't be held normally. At this moment, Sun Dongqing had never thought that she would almost ruin Yi Ying's future with her actions. When Yi Ying, who wanted to pretend that she had a heart attack, saw that her plan was blocked, her shoulders trembled even harder. She replied, "You can ask Yi Qian yourself. Why are you forcing me?" She lowered her head and didn't say anything else. She bit her lower lip until it was bleeding. She didn't dare to face Gao Yang's questioning, nor did she dare to quarrel with Jiasin. Yi Qian looked up slightly and glanced at her. He said to Jiasin, "Miss, you're more agitated than I am. Sit down. We've already dealt with the past. This isn't the main point now." At this point, was there still a need to harp on the past trivial matters? No, there was no need at all. Making a scene like this would not only embarrass Yi Ying, but also embarrass Sun Dongqing. Of course, it would also embarrass Yi Jifan. If that was the case, why did she have to add insult to injury? Gao Ying wasn't a man who would force Yi Ying. He didn't force Yi Ying to answer. Instead, he looked at Sun Dongqing. "Andy, why don't you go back and ask Yi Ying what happened when we went to the capital to study?" Went to the capital school? What else could they do when they went to the capital to study? Wasn't it just studying? The problem was Yi Qian, that wretched girl, was also there. Why didn't Ying mention it? Sun Dongqing only knew that her daughter had excellent grades and was going to the capital to study and participate in the competition. Other than that, she didn't know anything else. She also didn't know that Yi Qian was also going. This was because Yi Ying had never told her parents that Yi Qian was better than her and had even been selected to compete overseas. How could Sun Dongqing not understand her daughter? After being interrogated by Gao Yang, she quickly understood that her daughter had concealed the fact that Yi Qian had gone to the capital to study. From the looks of it, it would not make sense for him to say that the wretched girl did not return home during the summer vacation and fooled around outside. Fine, since he couldn't win this argument, he would talk about something else. And this kid from the Gao family is also a playboy. He was clearly with Ying, but in the blink of an eye, he was seduced by that wretched girl. Little brats, if this old lady wants to take care of one, it's the same as taking care of two. Today, she won't let this pair go. Sun Dongqing, whose expression was cloudy, slammed her hand on the desk and accused him. "Principal Chun, look at how the school teaches the students. Each and every one of them has no respect for their elders. How can I be at ease sending my Ying to the school if all of you are like this? Teacher Ku, you're a teacher. You know best what kind of person Yi Qian is. I'm not lying." Chapter 226. Besides, if the adults find out that the two of them are in a relationship, they won't admit it. I don't care as long as it doesn't affect my Ying. Now, it was up to Teacher Ku to deal with it. Sun Dongqing's mouth felt dry. If Ying wasn't still crying, she would have gone downstairs to buy a bottle of water and watch how the wretched girl would embarrass herself in class. Her words made Teacher Ku's body sway slightly. She was about to be killed by the mayor's wife. Gao Yang thought that even the stupidest person would know that they were wrong after what he said. Who would have thought that she was still twisting words and forcing logic, trying to pin the groundless accusation on Yi Jian? He, who had always been calm, suddenly felt that his internal organs were burning with anger. Madam Mayor, who is the one who got one of the gold medals that only 6 middle school students in the world can get? Gao Yang, who didn't waste his breath, slammed the table and shouted angrily. Sun Dongqing was indeed a genius to be able to force a person who always had a cold expression to show his emotions. Gao Yang, who had never lost his temper, suddenly shouted. In addition, Gao Yang also had such a strong aura. Sun Dongqing was so scared that she jumped up and her heart trembled. You, who are you challenging? Don't you have any manners? Principal Chun stood up when he saw that she was about to start throwing a tantrum again. He said in a dignified voice, "Now you can all be quiet. Zhang San is right. Li Si is also right. Let's see who is right. Madam Mayor, you are an adult. Don't be so calculated with a child." Sun Dongqing was indeed shocked. What did Yi Qian, that wretched girl, get? What gold medal did only 6 middle school students in the world get? Why did it sound like? It was very impressive. Ying, say something to Mom. What's going on? I'm going to die because of you, Mom. I'm going to die because of you. Ying, who was about to break down, was as pale as snow. Of course, she knew what was going on, because she knew she didn't want too many people to know that Yi Qian went abroad to get a gold medal. How was she inferior to Yi Qian? In the past, she had always been superior to Yi Qian, but now she was inferior to Yi Qian in every way. How could she accept this? How could she admit defeat? But the more it was like this, the more she couldn't get the results she wanted. Gold medal. Yi Qian had won the gold medal, but she had nothing. Even Gao Yang, who used to stand by her side, no longer helped her. Everything had changed. Everything was different. She hated this wretched girl to death. If it wasn't for her, he wouldn't have ended up like this. Her daughter was crying nonstop, which made Sun Dongqing anxious like an ant on a hot pan. Well, she cried her eyes out. Yi Qian, that wretched girl. How could she act like an older sister? He had clearly told her to help her younger sister in school. Look, she only knew how to gang up with her classmates to bully Ying. The more she thought about it, the angrier Sun Dongqing became. Her expression darkened. She turned around and pointed at Yi Qian. Stupid girl, can't you see how sad your sister is? How could she act like an elder sister? Get over here and admit your mistake. Quick! That wretched girl was becoming more and more disobedient. When old Yi came back, she would have a good talk with him. As an uncle, disciplining his niece was a matter of course. Chapter 227. This time, even Secretary Wu was flabbergasted. How could there be such a woman? This. How could Mayor Yi like someone like her? He even married her as his wife. Wouldn't he be harming his career? Yi Qian almost laughed out loud. Annie, are you smart or stupid? Do you think this school is your home? Do you think you can show off however you want? She didn't even need to say anything, and the entire class was already on her side. Tan Wei, Xie Sifeng, and the others who were close friends with Ying were also dumbfounded. They couldn't accept how Andy's son, who was usually so nice to them, became like this. Xie Sifeng wanted to stand up and say something, but she didn't dare to do so now. She was also afraid of being despised by the entire class. Auntie, how can you be so shameless? You're too shameless. Who do you think Yi Qian is? A slave? Auntie, you're Yi Ying's stepmother, right? Yeah, only a stepmother would do something like this. If she was Yi Ying's biological mother, she wouldn't cause a scene in school. This was an embarrassing thing. When Yi Zhifan rushed in, his wife became the target of public criticism. When the students saw that the teacher didn't stop them, they all spoke up for Yi Qian. Even so, they didn't target Yi Ying. At this point, Yi Qian felt that it was only right for her to stand up and say something back. She just stood up and raised her hand slightly. The students who were speaking up instantly quieted down. From this point, it was enough to see that Yi Qian had a certain level of influence in the class. At least, the students all respected her. Then, she slowly smiled and said, Auntie, I still have some self-respect. You scolded me, hit me, humiliated me, wronged me, and spread rumors to slander me. It's already like this. Don't tell me I still have to treat Yi Ying as my own sister and respect you as an elder. You should just be the mayor's wife. As for me, I'm sorry. I don't have an auntie like you or a sister like Yi Ying. After saying that, she sat down. Secretary Wu nodded in secret. She was natural and generous. Her every move was open and aboveboard. There was no trace of despicable behavior. Her character could be seen at a glance. He said to Principal Chun, "She is indeed a good student. She has a strong tolerance. It's a pity that she has such an auntie. Adversity makes people grow. Yi Qian, this girl has her own principles. Listen, this isn't over." Principal Chun purposely didn't. If he didn't come, she, as a teacher, would have to go to the hospital. She picked up the blackboard brush and slammed it on the podium a few times. Using her authority as a teacher, she made the students who had been chattering the moment Yi Jian sat down quiet down. She said sternly, "Quiet down. Everyone quiet down. If anyone dares to speak again, go outside and memorize for an hour." After the classroom quieted down, Teacher Ke said to Principal Chun, who didn't stand up to preside over the situation, "Principal, Mayor Yi is here. What do you think? Then let's invite the mayor into the classroom." Since the mayor was here, he naturally couldn't leave. Principal Chun was quite willing to invite the mayor into the classroom. He then ordered Gao Yang, who didn't leave and had a cold expression, "Student Gao, put the tape away. Let's invite Mayor Yi to watch it together." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.